In the vast steppes of Central Asia, where endless grasslands stretch beyond the horizon and the wind carries whispers of ancient migrations, there emerged a people whose very name would become synonymous with terror and conquest across the known world. The Huns, those enigmatic horsemen of the plains, represent one of history's most fascinating and controversial subjects. Their origins shrouded in mystery, their impact undeniable, and their legacy forever etched into the collective memory of civilizations they encountered. To understand the Hunnic peoples is to embark upon a journey through time, traversing the archaeological record, linguistic evidence, and historical accounts that piece together the story of nomadic warriors who would reshape the political landscape of Europe and Asia. The question of Hunnic origins has captivated scholars for generations, with debates raging over their ethnic composition, cultural practices, and the precise mechanisms by which they emerged as a dominant force in the ancient world. Archaeological evidence suggests that the roots of what we recognize as Hunnic culture can be traced back to the eastern reaches of the Eurasian steppe, in regions that encompass modern-day Mongolia, northern China, and southern Siberia. Here, in these harsh and unforgiving landscapes, nomadic societies had thrived for millennia, developing sophisticated systems of animal husbandry, seasonal migration patterns, and warrior traditions that would prove instrumental in their later conquests. The landscape itself shaped these early nomadic peoples in profound ways that extended far beyond mere survival strategies. The rolling hills and endless grasslands created natural highways for mounted warriors, while the extreme seasonal variations demanded adaptability and resilience that would become hallmarks of Hunnic culture. Winter temperatures that could plummet to 40 degrees below 0 Celsius required sophisticated knowledge of animal care, shelter construction, and resource management. During these brutal months, nomadic groups would seek protected valleys and construct temporary settlements using felt, wood, and animal hides, developing architectural techniques that prioritized mobility without sacrificing protection from the elements. The summer months brought different challenges and opportunities, as the steppes transformed into vast pastures capable of supporting enormous herds of livestock. During these warmer seasons, nomadic groups would disperse across hundreds of miles of territory, following established migration routes that had been refined over countless generations. These seasonal movements required intricate knowledge of water sources, pasture quality, and weather patterns, creating a sophisticated understanding of environmental management that rivaled the agricultural knowledge of sedentary civilizations. The most compelling connection in understanding Hunnic origins lies in their potential relationship with the Xiongnu Confederation, a powerful nomadic empire that dominated the eastern steppes from approximately the 3rd century before the Common Era to the 2nd century of the Common Era. The Xiongnu, whose name appears in Chinese historical records as early as the 3rd century before Christ, established a vast confederation that stretched from the Ordos Desert in the south to Lake Baikal in the north, controlling crucial trade routes and challenging Chinese imperial authority for centuries. Archaeological excavations at Xiongnu burial sites have revealed a sophisticated material culture characterized by elaborate horse gear, weapons technology, and artistic motifs that bear striking similarities to later Hunnic artifacts discovered in European contexts. The Xiongnu Confederation represented far more than a simple tribal alliance, functioning as a complex political entity with sophisticated administrative structures, diplomatic protocols, and economic systems that enabled them to coordinate activities across territories spanning thousands of miles. Chinese historical sources describe a hierarchical system of leadership that included the supreme ruler known as the Chanyu, regional governors who controlled specific territories, and military commanders responsible for organizing and leading cavalry forces that could number in the tens of thousands. This political sophistication suggests a level of organizational development that would later characterize the Hunnic confederations that emerged in European contexts. The military innovations developed by the Xiongnu would prove to be precursors to the devastating effectiveness of later Hunnic warfare. Their mastery of mounted archery, combined with sophisticated tactical doctrines that emphasize mobility, deception, and coordinated attacks, allowed relatively small forces to defeat much larger armies of infantry-based civilizations. Chinese military treatises from this period describe Xiongnu tactics with a mixture of admiration and frustration, noting their ability to appear suddenly on the battlefield, deliver devastating volleys of arrows, and disappear before effective counterattacks could be organized. The linguistic evidence supporting a Xiongnu-Hun connection remains fragmentary but intriguing. Chinese chroniclers recorded numerous Xiongnu titles, personal names, and administrative terms, many of which appear to share etymological roots with later Hunnic terminology preserved in Byzantine and Latin sources. The title of Shanyu, used by Xiongnu rulers, may be linguistically related to the Hunnic royal designation Khan, while various administrative and military terms show potential cognates across both cultures. However, the linguistic landscape of the ancient steppes was extraordinarily complex, with multiple Turkic, Mongolic, and Iranic languages coexisting and influencing one another through centuries of interaction and migration. Recent advances in historical linguistics have provided new insights into the language families represented in ancient steppe societies, revealing a multilingual environment where political and military elites often spoke several languages to facilitate communication with diverse tribal groups within their confederations. This linguistic diversity was not merely a practical necessity, but also reflected the complex ethnic composition of nomadic societies, which regularly incorporated new groups through conquest, alliance, and voluntary association. The ability to communicate across linguistic boundaries became a crucial skill for leaders who needed to maintain unity among diverse populations spread across vast territories. Archaeological investigations have uncovered numerous Xiongnu settlement sites and burial complexes that provide crucial insights into their social organization and cultural practices. The Noin Ula burial complex in northern Mongolia, dating to the 1st century before and after the Common Era, has yielded extraordinary finds including silk textiles, lacquerware, and metalwork that demonstrate the Xiongnu's extensive trade connections reaching from China to the Mediterranean world. These archaeological discoveries reveal a society far more sophisticated than earlier scholarly assumptions suggested, with evidence of specialized craftsmanship, hierarchical social structures, and complex diplomatic relationships with sedentary civilizations. The burial practices revealed at Noin Ula and other Xiongnu sites demonstrate a complex understanding of social hierarchy and spiritual beliefs that would later be reflected in Hunnic mortuary customs. Elite burials contained not only precious grave goods but also evidence of elaborate funeral ceremonies that included the sacrifice of horses, the construction of substantial burial chambers, and the placement of symbolic objects that reflected the deceased's status and achievements. These practices suggest sophisticated religious beliefs that combined ancestor worship with shamanistic traditions and possibly influences from organized religions encountered through trade and diplomatic contact. The material culture of the Xiongnu shows clear precedents for many practices later associated with the Huns. Their burial customs, which included the interment of horses alongside human remains, their distinctive cauldron-shaped bronze vessels, and their characteristic animal-style artistic motifs, all find parallels in later Hunnic archaeological contexts. The famous Xiongnu belt plaques, decorated with intricate scenes of animals and mythological creatures, employ artistic techniques and iconographic elements that would later appear in Hunnic metalwork discovered across Eastern Europe. The artistic traditions preserved in Xiongnu metalwork reveal sophisticated aesthetic sensibilities that combined practical functionality with symbolic meaning. Belt plaques serve not only as clothing fasteners but also as displays of status, wealth, and cultural identity. The intricate animal combat scenes that frequently appear on these objects may have represented more than mere decoration, possibly serving as visual narratives that conveyed important cultural values or historical memories. The technical skill required to produce these objects indicates the presence of specialized craftsmen who possessed advanced knowledge of metallurgy, design principles, and artistic techniques. Climate data from paleoenvironmental studies suggests that the eastern steppes experienced significant environmental pressures during the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, with cooling temperatures and reduced precipitation creating challenges for traditional nomadic lifestyles. These environmental stresses, combined with increasing pressure from Chinese military campaigns and internal political fragmentation, likely contributed to the westward migration of various nomadic groups that may have included elements of the former Xiongnu Confederation. The environmental challenges faced by steppe nomads during this period were compounded by the complex interactions between climate, vegetation, and animal populations that determined the carrying capacity of different regions. Reduced precipitation not only affected grass growth but also impacted the availability of water sources crucial for both human and animal survival. These environmental pressures created cascading effects throughout nomadic societies, forcing difficult decisions about migration routes, herd management, and territorial control that would have profound consequences for political stability and intertribal relationships. The process by which Eastern steppe peoples transformed into the Hunnic Confederation that would later appear in European sources represents one of the most complex migration phenomena in ancient history. Rather than a simple linear movement of a single people, the evidence suggests a complex process of tribal amalgamation, cultural synthesis, and gradual westward drift that occurred over several generations. Various nomadic groups, each contributing their own cultural elements, military traditions, and leadership structures, likely coalesced into the confederation that would eventually be recognized by European sources as the Huns. This process of confederation building required sophisticated diplomatic skills and political acumen, as leaders needed to negotiate agreements between groups that might have been traditional enemies or competitors for resources. The successful integration of diverse tribal elements into unified military and political structures represented a remarkable achievement in statecraft, requiring the development of new institutions, customs, and practices that could accommodate different traditions while maintaining overall coherence and effectiveness. Chinese historical records provide crucial evidence for understanding the dissolution of the Xiongnu Confederation and the subsequent westward movements of various nomadic groups. The Book of the Later Han describes how internal conflicts and external pressures led to the fragmentation of Xiongnu power, with various tribal groups splitting away from the main confederation and seeking new territories in the west. Some groups submitted to Chinese authority and were settled in border regions, while others maintained their independence and continued their nomadic lifestyle in territories beyond Chinese control. The internal conflicts that contributed to Xiongnu fragmentation appear to have involved succession disputes, disagreements over policy toward China, and competition for control of lucrative trade routes. These political divisions were exacerbated by environmental pressures and military setbacks that weakened central authority and encouraged regional leaders to pursue independent courses of action. The resulting fragmentation created opportunities for ambitious leaders to establish new confederations by attracting followers from various tribal backgrounds, setting the stage for the emergence of new political entities in Western regions. The archaeological record from Central Asian sites dating to the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Common Era shows evidence of significant population movements and cultural changes during this period. Sites in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Western Mongolia reveal material culture assemblages that combine traditional steppe elements with new influences, suggesting the movement and interaction of various nomadic groups during this crucial transitional period. These archaeological findings support the hypothesis that the westward migration of steppe peoples was a gradual process involving multiple waves of movement rather than a single mass migration event. The material evidence from these transitional sites reveals fascinating details about how nomadic societies adapted to new environments and circumstances during their westward migrations. Changes in pottery styles, metalworking techniques, and burial practices reflect both continuity with traditional customs and innovation in response to new challenges and opportunities. The presence of objects from diverse geographical origins in single archaeological contexts suggests extensive trade networks and cultural exchanges that facilitated the spread of ideas and technologies across vast distances. Linguistic analysis of ancient Central Asian languages provides additional evidence for understanding the complex ethnic composition of migrating nomadic groups. The presence of Turkic, Mongolic, and Iranic linguistic elements in various historical sources suggests that the nomadic confederations of this period were ethnically diverse, incorporating speakers of multiple language families within their political structures. This linguistic diversity would later be reflected in the Hunnic Confederation, which appears to have included groups of various ethnic backgrounds united under a common political and military framework. The multilingual character of these confederations created both opportunities and challenges for their leaders, who needed to develop communication strategies and administrative practices that could function effectively across linguistic boundaries. The emergence of lingua franca languages and the development of translation protocols became crucial for maintaining political unity and military coordination. These linguistic adaptations would prove essential for the success of later Hunnic expansion into Europe, where they would encounter even greater linguistic diversity. The material culture that emerged from these Central Asian developments shows clear continuities with later Hunnic practices, while also displaying innovative elements that suggest ongoing cultural evolution and adaptation. Archaeological sites from the 3rd and 4th centuries reveal sophisticated metalworking techniques, including the production of composite bows, iron weapons, and decorative metalwork that would become characteristic of Hunnic material culture. The development of specialized horse gear, including distinctive stirrups and saddle fittings, demonstrates the ongoing refinement of nomadic military technology during this period. The technological innovations developed during this transitional period represented significant advances in military effectiveness and practical utility. Improvements in metallurgy allowed for the production of stronger, lighter weapons and tools, while advances in leatherworking and textile production enhanced the quality and durability of clothing, equipment, and shelter materials. These technological developments were often the result of cultural exchanges with settled populations, demonstrating the importance of trade and diplomatic contact in driving innovation within nomadic societies. Trade networks across Central Asia played a crucial role in the cultural and technological development of nomadic societies during this transitional period. Archaeological evidence shows that nomadic groups maintained extensive commercial relationships with sedentary civilizations, exchanging animal products, furs, and precious materials for manufactured goods, luxury items, and agricultural products. These trade relationships not only provided economic benefits, but also facilitated the exchange of technological innovations, artistic influences, and cultural practices that would shape the development of nomadic societies. The complexity of these trade networks extended far beyond simple commodity exchange, encompassing sophisticated systems of credit, quality control, and dispute resolution that enabled commerce to flourish across vast distances and cultural boundaries. Nomadic merchants developed specialized knowledge of market conditions, transportation logistics, and diplomatic protocols that allowed them to operate effectively in diverse political and cultural environments. This commercial expertise would later prove valuable as Hunnic groups established themselves in new territories and sought to develop economic relationships with local populations. The religious and spiritual practices of Central Asian nomadic peoples during this period show evidence of complex syncretistic traditions that combined shamanistic beliefs with influences from Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, and other organized religions encountered through trade and diplomatic contact. Archaeological evidence from burial sites reveals diverse mortuary practices that reflect this religious complexity, with some burials showing clear shamanistic elements, while others incorporate symbols and practices associated with organized religions. The spiritual landscape of the steppes during this period was characterized by remarkable religious tolerance and adaptability, with nomadic societies readily incorporating new religious elements that proved useful or appealing while maintaining core traditional beliefs and practices. This religious flexibility reflected the practical needs of nomadic societies, which regularly encountered diverse populations with different spiritual traditions and needed to maintain social cohesion despite religious diversity. The resulting syncretistic traditions would later influence Hunnic religious practices and contribute to their ability to integrate diverse populations within their confederation. The social organization of Central Asian nomadic societies during the formation period of what would become the Hunnic Confederation demonstrates sophisticated political structures that went far beyond simple tribal arrangements. Archaeological and historical evidence suggests the existence of hierarchical societies with specialized roles, including professional warriors, craftsmen, traders, and religious specialists. These complex social structures provided the organizational framework necessary for the large-scale military campaigns and political coordination that would characterize later Hunnic activities. The development of these hierarchical social structures required the creation of new institutions and practices that could maintain order and coordinate activities across large populations and vast territories. The emergence of professional military classes, administrative bureaucracies, and specialized craft guilds represented significant innovations in nomadic social organization. These institutional developments would prove crucial for the success of later Hunnic expansion and the establishment of stable political control over diverse populations. The development of military technology and tactics during this Central Asian formative period laid the foundation for the devastating effectiveness of later Hunnic warfare. Archaeological evidence shows the refinement of composite bow technology, the development of specialized arrowheads for different tactical purposes, and the evolution of cavalry equipment that maximized the mobility and striking power of mounted warriors. These technological innovations, combined with sophisticated tactical doctrines based on mobility, deception, and coordinated attacks, would prove decisive in later Hunnic encounters with sedentary civilizations. The tactical innovations developed during this period represented a systematic approach to warfare that maximized the natural advantages of nomadic societies while minimizing their potential weaknesses. The emphasis on mobility and archery allowed nomadic forces to engage enemies on favorable terms, while avoiding the pitched battles that might favor larger, more heavily equipped infantry forces. The development of sophisticated scouting systems, communication protocols, and logistical arrangements enabled nomadic armies to coordinate complex operations across vast territories with remarkable effectiveness. The artistic traditions that emerged from Central Asian nomadic societies during this period display a distinctive synthesis of steppe animal art with influences from various sedentary civilizations. Metalwork, textiles, and other artifacts show the development of iconographic programs that would later become characteristic of Hunnic material culture, including stylized animal motifs, geometric patterns, and symbolic representations that reflected both practical and spiritual aspects of nomadic life. The artistic achievements of this period demonstrate the sophisticated aesthetic sensibilities of nomadic societies and their ability to create works of lasting beauty and cultural significance. The integration of diverse artistic influences into coherent stylistic traditions required considerable skill and creativity, reflecting the cultural dynamism and adaptability that characterized nomadic societies. These artistic traditions would continue to evolve and develop as nomadic groups moved westward, incorporating new influences while maintaining distinctive characteristics that reflected their steppe origins. Environmental factors continued to play a crucial role in shaping nomadic societies and their migration patterns throughout this formative period. Paleoclimatic data indicates ongoing challenges from climate variability, including periods of drought and harsh winters that could devastate livestock herds and force nomadic groups to seek new territories. These environmental pressures, combined with political and military factors, created the conditions that would eventually drive nomadic confederations westward toward Europe. The relationship between environmental conditions and nomadic migration patterns reveals the sophisticated understanding of ecological principles that characterize steppe societies. Nomadic leaders needed to balance immediate survival needs with long-term sustainability considerations, making complex decisions about resource allocation, territorial control, and population movement that would determine the success or failure of their communities. This ecological knowledge would prove invaluable as nomadic groups encountered new environments during their westward migrations. The material culture of the Huns, as it would later be recognized in European contexts, represents a sophisticated synthesis of technological innovations, artistic traditions, and practical adaptations developed over centuries of nomadic life on the Central Asian steppes. Their distinctive cauldrons, used for cooking and ritual purposes, demonstrate advanced metalworking techniques and reflect the practical needs of mobile societies. These bronze vessels, often decorated with elaborate handles and surface designs, served both utilitarian and ceremonial functions, playing important roles in community feasting and religious observances. The production of these cauldrons required specialized knowledge of metallurgy, including techniques for alloying bronze, controlling temperature during casting, and finishing surfaces to achieve desired aesthetic and functional qualities. The standardization of cauldron designs across vast geographical areas suggests the existence of established craft traditions and possibly itinerant specialists who traveled between different nomadic communities. The ritual significance of these vessels extended beyond their practical utility, with archaeological evidence suggesting their use in ceremonies related to leadership succession, seasonal celebrations, and religious observances. Hunnic warfare technology represented the culmination of centuries of steppe military innovation, with their composite bows standing as perhaps the most sophisticated projectile weapons of their time. These bows, constructed from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, could achieve draw weights exceeding 100 pounds and launch arrows with devastating accuracy at ranges that far exceeded the capabilities of contemporary European weapons. The construction of these bows required specialized knowledge and considerable time investment, with master bowers spending months crafting a single weapon using materials that had been carefully prepared and seasoned over years. The composite bow represented a remarkable achievement in materials science and engineering, combining different organic materials in ways that maximize strength, flexibility, and durability while minimizing weight and bulk. The horn provided compression strength, the wood contributed tensile strength and flexibility, and the sinew backing added additional power and resilience. The precise proportions and arrangement of these materials required deep understanding of their properties and extensive experimentation to achieve optimal performance. The arrows used with these composite bows showed remarkable diversity in design and function, with different types optimized for specific tactical situations. Bodkin points, designed to penetrate armor, featured narrow, sharp tips that could punch through mail and even some forms of plate protection. Broadhead arrows, intended for use against unarmored targets or horses, featured wide, razor-sharp blades that could cause devastating wounds and significant blood loss. Specialized arrows for siege warfare included fire arrows equipped with combustible materials and heavy arrows designed to damage equipment and fortifications. The production of these specialized arrows required sophisticated understanding of aerodynamics, metallurgy, and battlefield tactics. The balance between arrowhead weight and shaft stiffness needed to be precisely calibrated to ensure accuracy and penetrating power at different ranges. The development of specialized arrowheads for different purposes demonstrates the systematic approach that nomadic societies took toward military technology, with innovations driven by practical battlefield experience and continuous refinement based on changing tactical requirements. The horse culture of the Huns represented one of the most sophisticated equestrian traditions in the ancient world, with their society organized around the care, breeding, and tactical employment of horses for both peaceful and military purposes. Archaeological evidence suggests that Hunnic groups maintained large herds of horses, with different animals bred for specific purposes including riding, pack transport, and warfare. Their knowledge of horse breeding, veterinary care, and training techniques allowed them to maintain the large cavalry forces that would prove so decisive in their later military campaigns. The relationship between the Huns and their horses extended far beyond mere utility, encompassing deep cultural and spiritual connections that influenced every aspect of nomadic life. Horses were not simply tools or weapons, but partners in survival, sources of status and wealth, and subjects of religious reverence. The care and training of horses required extensive knowledge passed down through generations, including understanding of equine psychology, nutrition, healthcare, and breeding practices that enabled nomadic societies to maintain superior cavalry forces. Hunnic saddles and horse gear demonstrated remarkable innovation in design and construction, with archaeological finds revealing sophisticated equipment that maximized both rider comfort and tactical effectiveness. Their saddles, constructed with wooden frames and padded with felt or leather, provided stable platforms for mounted archery, while allowing for the quick mounting and dismounting necessary for their fluid tactical doctrines. Stirrups, which may have been introduced to Europe through Hunnic influence, provided additional stability and leverage for mounted warriors engaged in close combat. The development of specialized horse gear represented a continuous process of innovation and refinement driven by the practical demands of nomadic warfare and daily life. Bridles, bits, and other control equipment were designed to provide maximum responsiveness while minimizing discomfort to the horse. Protective equipment for horses, including leather and metal armor for valuable war mounts, demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of both equine anatomy and battlefield requirements that characterized Hunnic horse culture. The social organization of Hunnic society reflected the complex demands of nomadic life, with hierarchical structures that balanced the need for centralized leadership with the practical requirements of managing dispersed tribal groups across vast territories. Archaeological evidence from burial sites reveals clear social stratification, with elite burials containing elaborate grave goods including precious metals, silk textiles, and sophisticated weapons, while common burials show more modest assemblages reflecting the material culture of ordinary tribal members. The maintenance of social hierarchy within nomadic societies required different mechanisms than those employed by sedentary civilizations, with leadership authority based on demonstrated competence, successful decision-making, and the ability to provide for community welfare rather than simply inherited status. This merit-based component of leadership selection created dynamic political environments where ambitious individuals could rise to positions of authority through military success, diplomatic skill, or economic achievement. Hunnic leadership structures appear to have been based on a combination of hereditary authority and demonstrated military competence, with rulers required to maintain their positions through successful leadership in both war and peace. The title systems preserved in various historical sources suggest a complex hierarchy of ranks and responsibilities, with different levels of authority corresponding to different scales of political and military organization. This hierarchical system allowed for the coordination of large confederations while maintaining the flexibility necessary for nomadic societies. The challenge of maintaining political unity across diverse tribal groups required sophisticated diplomatic skills and the development of institutional mechanisms that could accommodate different traditions and interests while maintaining overall coherence. The success of Hunnic Confederation building demonstrates remarkable political acumen and organizational ability, with leaders able to balance competing demands and conflicting loyalties while pursuing common objectives that benefited the Confederation as a whole. The role of women in Hunnic society appears to have been more prominent than in many contemporary civilizations, with archaeological and historical evidence suggesting that women could hold significant political and religious authority. Some burial sites contain female remains accompanied by weapons and other high-status grave goods, indicating that women may have participated in warfare or held important leadership positions within their communities. This relatively elevated status of women may have reflected the practical demands of nomadic life, where all community members needed to contribute to survival and success. The participation of women in nomadic societies extended across multiple domains of activity, including economic production, religious practices, diplomatic negotiations, and military operations. The mobile nature of nomadic life required that all community members be capable of contributing to essential activities, creating opportunities for women to develop skills and assume responsibilities that might be restricted in more rigidly stratified sedentary societies. This practical egalitarianism contributed to the resilience and adaptability that characterize successful nomadic communities. Hunnic religious practices combined shamanistic traditions with influences from various organized religions encountered through trade and conquest. Archaeological evidence suggests the importance of ritual activities involving horses, with horse sacrifices playing important roles in burial ceremonies and other religious observances. The presence of various amulets, ritual objects, and symbolic decorations in archaeological contexts indicates a rich spiritual life that incorporated elements of ancestor worship, nature spirituality, and possibly influences from Buddhism and other organized religions. The syncretic nature of Hunnic religious practices reflected the cosmopolitan character of steppe societies and their openness to incorporating useful or appealing elements from diverse spiritual traditions. This religious flexibility served practical purposes in managing diverse populations within nomadic confederations, while also reflecting genuine spiritual curiosity and adaptability. The resulting religious synthesis created rich and complex spiritual traditions that provided meaning and guidance for nomadic communities facing the challenges of life on the steppes. The economic foundations of Hunnic society were based on a combination of pastoralism, raiding, tribute collection, and trade, creating a complex economic system that could support large populations while maintaining the mobility necessary for nomadic life. Their herds of horses, cattle, sheep, and goats provided the basic necessities of life, including food, clothing materials, and transportation, while also serving as measures of wealth and status within their society. The management of these herds required sophisticated knowledge of animal husbandry, seasonal migration patterns, and pasture management. The pastoral foundation of nomadic economies required extensive knowledge of animal behavior, nutrition, breeding, and health care that represented one of humanity's most sophisticated relationships with domesticated animals. The success of nomadic societies depended on their ability to maximize the productivity of their herds while maintaining the mobility necessary for accessing seasonal pastures and responding to environmental challenges. This required careful balance between herd size, pasture capacity, and migration logistics that demanded considerable expertise and experience. Trade relationships played a crucial role in Hunnic economic life, with nomadic groups serving as intermediaries in the exchange of goods between various sedentary civilizations. Archaeological evidence shows that Hunnic communities had access to luxury goods from China, Persia, and the Mediterranean world, including silk textiles, precious metals, and exotic materials that were incorporated into their material culture. These trade relationships also facilitated the exchange of technological innovations and cultural influences that enriched Hunnic society. The commercial activities of nomadic societies required sophisticated understanding of market conditions, transportation logistics, and diplomatic protocols that enabled trade to flourish across vast distances and cultural boundaries. Nomadic merchants developed expertise in evaluating goods, negotiating prices, and managing complex transactions that might involve multiple parties and extend over considerable periods of time. This commercial sophistication contributed to the economic prosperity that supported Hunnic military and political activities. The westward migration of Hunnic groups represented one of the most significant population movements in ancient history, with far-reaching consequences for the political and cultural development of both Europe and Asia. This migration was not a single event, but rather a complex process that unfolded over several generations, involving multiple waves of movement and the gradual establishment of Hunnic presence across vast territories stretching from Central Asia to Eastern Europe. The complexity of this migration process reflects the sophisticated decision-making and organizational capabilities of nomadic societies, which needed to coordinate the movement of large populations along with their livestock, equipment, and household goods across thousands of miles of often hostile territory. The success of these migrations required extensive planning, scouting, and diplomatic preparation, as well as the ability to adapt quickly to unexpected challenges and opportunities encountered along the way. The initial phases of westward migration appear to have been driven by a combination of environmental pressures, political conflicts, and opportunities for expansion into territories that offered better pastures and weaker resistance from local populations. Climate data suggests that the Central Asian steppes experienced periods of environmental stress during the 3rd and 4th centuries, with reduced precipitation and harsh winters creating challenges for traditional nomadic lifestyles and forcing groups to seek new territories. The environmental factors driving migration were compounded by political instability and military pressures that made traditional territories less secure or less attractive for nomadic communities. The interaction between environmental and political pressures created cascading effects that could rapidly transform local challenges into regional crises requiring large-scale population movements to resolve. The ability of nomadic societies to respond effectively to these combined pressures demonstrates their remarkable adaptability and organizational sophistication. As Hunnic groups moved westward, they encountered various settled and semi-nomadic populations who had established themselves in the regions between Central Asia and Europe. These encounters resulted in complex processes of conflict, negotiation, and cultural exchange that shaped both the migrating Hunnic groups and the populations they encountered. Some local groups were displaced or absorbed into the expanding Hunnic Confederation, while others maintained their independence through diplomatic arrangements or successful resistance. The encounters between migrating nomadic groups and established populations created opportunities for cultural exchange and innovation that enriched all parties involved. New technologies, artistic styles, religious practices, and social institutions emerged from these contacts, contributing to the cultural dynamism that characterized frontier regions during periods of large-scale migration. The ability of different groups to find mutually beneficial arrangements often determined whether encounters resulted in conflict or cooperation. The archaeological record from sites along the migration routes shows evidence of significant cultural changes during this period, with material culture assemblages reflecting the movement and interaction of various populations. Sites in Kazakhstan, southern Russia, and Ukraine reveal layers of occupation that document the gradual westward movement of steppe peoples and their encounters with local populations. These archaeological findings provide crucial evidence for understanding the complex processes involved in large-scale population movements. The material evidence from migration routes reveals fascinating details about how nomadic societies adapted their traditional practices to new environments and circumstances. Changes in settlement patterns, burial customs, and material culture reflect both continuity with traditional ways of life and innovation in response to new challenges and opportunities. The archaeological record thus provides a detailed picture of cultural adaptation and change that complements and enriches the historical accounts of these migrations. The impact of Hunnic migration on local populations was profound and varied, with some communities experiencing displacement and disruption, while others benefited from new trade opportunities and cultural exchanges. Archaeological evidence suggests that some settled communities adapted to the presence of nomadic groups by modifying their economic strategies, defensive arrangements, and cultural practices. These adaptations demonstrate the dynamic nature of cultural contact and the ability of human societies to respond creatively to changing circumstances. The long-term consequences of these population interactions extended far beyond the immediate effects of migration, creating new cultural syntheses and political arrangements that would influence regional development for centuries to come. The establishment of new trade networks, diplomatic relationships, and cultural practices during this period laid foundations for future historical developments that would reshape the political and cultural landscape of both Europe and Asia. The arrival of the Huns in Europe during the 4th century represents one of the most dramatic and consequential episodes in the history of human migration. This momentous event fundamentally altered the political, social, and cultural landscape of an entire continent, setting in motion a chain of events that would reshape the Roman world and contribute to the transformation of ancient Europe into the medieval period. The The Hunnic migration was not merely a military conquest, but a complex process of cultural interaction, political negotiation, and social adaptation that unfolded over several generations and involved multiple populations across vast geographical distances. Understanding the full scope of this transformation requires examining not only the immediate military and political consequences of Hunnic expansion, but also the deeper currents of social change that accompanied the movement of peoples across the Eurasian steppes. The Huns brought with them not just superior military technology and tactics, but an entirely different way of organizing society, conducting warfare, and relating to the natural world. Their arrival challenged fundamental assumptions about power, authority, and cultural identity that had governed European societies for centuries. The first documented encounters between Hunnic forces and European populations occurred along the northern shores of the Black Sea, in the rich grasslands that had long served as home to various Gothic tribes. These Gothic peoples, themselves migrants from Scandinavia who had established powerful kingdoms in what is now Ukraine and southern Russia, represented some of the most formidable warrior societies of their time. The Goths had developed sophisticated political structures, maintained extensive trade networks with the Roman Empire, and created a distinctive cultural synthesis that combined Germanic traditions with influences from the classical world and the steppe peoples with whom they had long coexisted. The Gothic kingdoms of the 4th century were far from primitive tribal societies, but rather represented complex political entities with elaborate hierarchies, specialized crafts, and sophisticated military organizations. Archaeological excavations at sites like Chernyakov have revealed evidence of planned settlements, advanced agricultural techniques, and extensive trade connections that stretched from the Baltic Sea to the Mediterranean. Gothic craftsmen produced high-quality metalwork, jewelry, and weapons that were prized throughout the barbarian world and even within the Roman Empire itself. The Gothic political system was based on a combination of traditional Germanic institutions and innovations developed through contact with more centralized states. Kings ruled with the advice of councils of nobles and warriors, while local affairs were managed by assemblies of free men who could bear arms and participate in military campaigns. This system provided considerable flexibility and resilience, allowing Gothic societies to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining their essential cultural identity. The initial contact between Huns and Goths appears to have been gradual rather than sudden, with small groups of Hunnic warriors and their families settling in territories adjacent to Gothic lands before larger migrations followed. Archaeological evidence from sites across the Pontic steppe suggests that this early period of contact involved considerable cultural exchange, with Gothic craftsmen adopting certain Hunnic techniques in metalworking and horse equipment, while Hunnic groups incorporated elements of Gothic material, culture into their own practices. This pattern of cultural borrowing and adaptation would become a characteristic feature of Hunnic interactions with European populations throughout their westward expansion. The process of cultural exchange was facilitated by the existence of established trade routes that connected the steppe regions with the settled agricultural areas of Europe. These commercial networks had developed over centuries and involved not only the exchange of goods, but also the movement of people, ideas, and technologies. Hunnic merchants and craftsmen were already familiar with many aspects of European material culture before the major military campaigns began, while Gothic traders had extensive knowledge of steppe societies and their customs. The gradual nature of early Hunnic settlement allowed both populations to develop strategies for coexistence and mutual benefit. Some Gothic communities welcomed Hunnic settlers as valuable allies who could provide military assistance and access to steppe resources, while certain Hunnic groups found advantages in adopting aspects of Gothic agricultural and craft techniques. These peaceful interactions created precedents for cooperation that would influence later developments even as military conflicts intensified. However, the relatively peaceful coexistence of the early contact period gave way to increasingly violent confrontations as larger Hunnic populations moved into territories claimed by Gothic tribes. The pressure of these migrations created a cascading effect throughout the region, as displaced Gothic groups sought new territories and came into conflict with other populations, including both neighboring Germanic tribes and the Roman frontier forces that guarded the Danube border. The complexity of these interactions is reflected in contemporary accounts that describe alliances and conflicts involving multiple groups, with some Gothic leaders choosing to ally themselves with Hunnic forces, while others organized resistance movements or sought refuge within Roman territory. The escalation from peaceful contact to violent confrontation was driven by several factors beyond simple territorial competition. climate changes in the Central Asian steppes had reduced the carrying capacity of traditional Hunnic grazing lands, forcing larger numbers of people to seek new territories for their herds and families. Simultaneously, political developments within Hunnic society had created more centralized leadership structures capable of organizing and directing large-scale military campaigns. The demographic pressure created by these migrations was enormous, with entire tribal confederations on the move across thousands of miles of territory. The logistics of moving such large numbers of people, along with their animals and possessions, required sophisticated organizational capabilities and placed tremendous strain on the resources of any region through which they passed. Even when Hunnic leaders had no immediate intention of permanent conquest, the mere presence of such large mobile populations created instability and competition for essential resources. The most dramatic episode in these early encounters was the conflict between Hunnic forces and the Ostrogothic kingdom of Ermanaric, a powerful ruler who had established dominion over vast territories stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. According to the Gothic historian Jordanus, Ermanaric commanded the loyalty of numerous tribes and had created one of the largest political confederations in the history of the Germanic peoples. The confrontation between this established Gothic power and the advancing Hunnic forces represented a clash between two very different models of political organization and military strategy, with the centralized authority and infantry-based tactics of the Goths facing the fluid leadership, structures, and cavalry warfare of the steppe nomads. Ermanaric's confederation represented the culmination of centuries of Gothic political development and territorial expansion. His kingdom included not only Gothic tribes, but also various Slavic, Baltic, and Iranian peoples who had accepted Gothic overlordship in exchange for protection and participation in the benefits of long-distance trade. The diversity of this confederation was both a source of strength, providing access to different resources and military capabilities, and a potential weakness, as the loyalty of subject peoples could not always be guaranteed in times of crisis. The military organization of Ermanaric's kingdom reflected this political complexity, with different contingents contributing their specialized capabilities to a combined force that could field tens of thousands of warriors. Gothic heavy infantry formed the core of the army, supported by Slavic archers, Alan cavalry, and various auxiliary forces drawn from smaller tribes and client peoples. This military system had proven effective in previous conflicts with other barbarian confederations and Roman frontier forces, giving Gothic leaders confidence in their ability to resist Hunnic expansion. The defeat of Ermanaric and the collapse of the Ostrogothic Confederation sent shockwaves throughout the Germanic world and marked a decisive turning point in the balance of power across Eastern Europe. The victory demonstrated the effectiveness of Hunnic military techniques and political strategies, while revealing the vulnerability of even the most powerful settled kingdoms to the new forms of warfare practiced by the steppe peoples. The psychological impact of this triumph was perhaps as important as its immediate military consequences, as news of the Gothic defeat spread throughout the barbarian world and established the Huns as a force to be reckoned with in European politics. The collapse of Gothic resistance was not simply the result of military superiority, but reflected fundamental differences in strategic thinking and tactical flexibility between steppe and settled societies. Gothic military tradition emphasized formal battles between organized armies, with victory determined by the courage and skill of individual warriors fighting in disciplined formations. Hunnic warfare, by contrast, relied on mobility, deception, and the ability to concentrate overwhelming force at decisive points while avoiding direct confrontation when conditions were unfavorable. The Hunnic victory was facilitated by their superior intelligence networks and diplomatic capabilities, which allowed them to exploit divisions within the Gothic Confederation and neutralize potential allies before the main military confrontation occurred. Hunnic agents had spent years cultivating relationships with disaffected Gothic nobles and subject peoples, creating opportunities for betrayal and defection that proved crucial when open warfare began. This combination of military skill and political sophistication would become a hallmark of Hunnic expansion throughout Europe. The displacement of the Ostrogoths created a massive refugee crisis that would have profound implications for the Roman Empire and the broader European world. Tens of thousands of Gothic warriors, along with their families and dependents, found themselves without homes or traditional sources of livelihood, forced to seek new territories or accept subordination to Hunnic authority. Many chose the latter option, becoming federated allies of the Huns and contributing their military expertise to further Hunnic conquests. Others attempted to carve out new kingdoms and territories previously controlled by other tribes, leading to a complex series of conflicts and population movements that affected peoples from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. The scale of Gothic displacement was unprecedented in European history up to that point, involving not just military forces but entire populations, including craftsmen, farmers, merchants, and religious leaders. The movement of such large numbers of people created logistical challenges that strained the resources of every region they entered, while the presence of displaced warrior bands posed security threats that existing political authorities were often unable to address effectively. The integration of Gothic military forces into Hunnic armies represented a significant evolution in steppe military organization and capabilities. Gothic warriors brought with them expertise in siege warfare, fortification construction, and infantry tactics that complemented the traditional Hunnic strengths in cavalry warfare and battlefield mobility. This military synthesis created new forms of combined arms tactics that proved devastatingly effective against both barbarian enemies and Roman frontier forces. The most significant group of Gothic refugees, however, chose to seek asylum within the Roman Empire itself, approaching the imperial authorities with requests for settlement rights in exchange for military service. This decision would prove to have momentous consequences for both the Gothic people and the Roman state, as it marked the beginning of a new phase in barbarian-Roman relations that would ultimately contribute to the transformation of the empire itself. The negotiations surrounding Gothic settlement revealed the complex diplomatic and military challenges posed by the Hunnic migrations, as Roman officials struggled to balance the need for military manpower against concerns about the security risks posed by large-scale barbarian settlement within imperial territory. The Gothic approach to the Roman Empire represented a calculated strategic decision based on careful assessment of available alternatives. Gothic leaders recognized that continued resistance to Hunnic expansion was likely to prove futile, while attempts to establish new territories through conquest of other barbarian peoples would involve prolonged warfare with uncertain outcomes. Settlement within the empire offered the prospect of security and stability, along with access to Roman markets, technologies, and administrative systems that could benefit Gothic society in the long term. The Roman response to Gothic settlement requests reflected the empire's own strategic calculations and internal political dynamics. Imperial authorities recognized the military value of Gothic warriors and the potential benefits of using barbarian forces against other external threats, but they also understood the risks involved in allowing large numbers of armed foreigners to settle within imperial territory. The negotiations that followed would establish precedents for barbarian settlement that would influence imperial policy for generations to come. The Gothic settlement negotiations also highlighted the sophisticated understanding of Roman politics and diplomacy that the barbarian peoples had developed through centuries of contact with the empire. Gothic leaders demonstrated remarkable skill in presenting their requests in terms that appealed to Roman interests and concerns, emphasizing their potential value as military allies while downplaying the risks associated with their settlement. These diplomatic exchanges provide valuable insights into the complex relationships that existed between the Roman state and the various barbarian peoples, relationships that were characterized by mutual dependence as well as suspicion and conflict. The diplomatic sophistication displayed by Gothic negotiators reflected decades of experience in dealing with Roman officials along the Danube frontier. Gothic kings and nobles had long maintained relationships with Roman commanders, merchants, and administrators, developing an intimate understanding of imperial administrative procedures, military organization, and political culture. This knowledge proved invaluable in crafting settlement proposals that addressed Roman concerns while advancing Gothic interests. The negotiation process itself revealed the flexibility and pragmatism that characterized late Roman diplomacy in dealing with barbarian peoples. Imperial officials were willing to consider innovative arrangements that departed from traditional Roman practices if such arrangements promised to advance imperial interests. The willingness to grant settlement rights to entire barbarian populations represented a significant evolution in Roman thinking about frontier security and imperial expansion. The successful negotiation of Gothic settlement rights represented a significant victory for barbarian diplomacy and established important precedents for future interactions between the empire and displaced populations. However, the implementation of these agreements proved to be far more problematic than their negotiation, as Roman officials struggled to provide adequate supplies and appropriate territories for the large numbers of Gothic settlers. The resulting tensions and conflicts would contribute to some of the most serious military crises faced by the late Roman Empire, including the devastating defeat at Adrianople that claimed the life of the Emperor Valens and demonstrated the military capabilities of the displaced Gothic forces. The breakdown of the Gothic settlement arrangements illustrated the gap between diplomatic agreements and administrative reality in the late Roman Empire. Imperial officials who negotiated the treaties often lacked the authority or resources necessary to implement their provisions effectively, while local commanders and administrators frequently pursued policies that contradicted central government directives. The resulting confusion and inconsistency created opportunities for misunderstanding and conflict that undermined the potential benefits of barbarian settlement. The Gothic experience within the empire also revealed the challenges faced by barbarian peoples attempting to maintain their cultural identity while adapting to Roman political and social systems. Gothic leaders found themselves caught between the expectations of their own people, who sought to preserve traditional customs and institutions, and the demands of Roman authorities, who expected compliance with imperial laws and regulations. The tensions created by these competing pressures would influence barbarian-Roman relations for centuries to come. The ripple effects of Hunnic expansion continued to be felt throughout the barbarian world as other Germanic tribes found themselves facing similar pressures and choices. The Visigoths, Vandals, Alans, and numerous smaller groups all experienced displacement and disruption as a result of the changing political and military situation in Eastern Europe. Some of these peoples chose to migrate further west, eventually establishing new kingdoms in Gaul, Spain, and North Africa. Others sought accommodation with the Huns themselves, accepting tributary status in exchange for protection and the opportunity to participate in Hunnic military campaigns against common enemies. The westward migration of these displaced peoples created a domino effect that transformed the ethnic and political map of Europe. The Vandals, driven from their traditional territories in Central Europe, eventually established a powerful kingdom in North Africa that controlled vital Mediterranean trade routes and posed a significant threat to Roman security. The Visigoths carved out territories in southwestern Gaul and eventually conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula, creating a kingdom that would endure for centuries. The Alans, an Iranian-speaking people with strong cavalry traditions, were particularly affected by Hunnic expansion due to their strategic position between the steppe regions and the settled areas of Europe. Some Alan groups were incorporated directly into Hunnic forces, while others joined the westward migrations of Germanic peoples or sought refuge within the Roman Empire. The dispersal of the Alans contributed to the spread of steppe military techniques and cultural practices throughout Western Europe. The formation of these tributary relationships represented a crucial development in the evolution of Hunnic power and influence in Europe. Unlike the traditional conquest and occupation strategies employed by settled peoples, the Huns developed a sophisticated system of indirect rule that allowed them to exercise control over vast territories and diverse populations without the administrative burden of direct governance. This system was based on personal relationships between Hunnic leaders and the chiefs of subject peoples, reinforced by the exchange of hostages, tribute payments, and mutual military obligations. The tributary system developed by the Huns represented an innovative approach to imperial organization that drew upon both steppe traditions and lessons learned from contact with more centralized states. The flexibility of this system allowed Hunnic leaders to adapt their administrative practices to the specific needs and traditions of different subject peoples, while maintaining overall political unity and military effectiveness. This approach proved particularly effective in managing the diverse ethnic and cultural groups that comprised the expanding Hunnic Confederation. The personal nature of tributary relationships within the Hunnic system created both opportunities and vulnerabilities for the Confederation's long-term stability. Strong personal bonds between Hunnic leaders and their vassals could ensure loyalty and cooperation even in difficult circumstances, but the death or displacement of key figures could also lead to the rapid dissolution of political arrangements. The success of the tributary system therefore depended heavily on the diplomatic skills and personal charisma of individual Hunnic rulers. The flexibility and adaptability of this tributary system proved to be one of the key factors in Hunnic success, as it allowed them to incorporate diverse populations with different cultural traditions, economic systems, and military capabilities into a single political framework. Germanic warriors brought their expertise in infantry combat and siege warfare, while Alanic cavalry provided additional mobility and striking power. Slavic agriculturalists contributed food supplies and logistical support, while various craftsmen and traders facilitated the exchange of goods and technologies across the expanding Hunnic sphere of influence. the integration of diverse military traditions within the Hunnic Confederation created new tactical possibilities that enhanced the effectiveness of steppe warfare in European conditions. Germanic siege techniques allowed Hunnic forces to reduce fortified positions that had previously been immune to nomadic assault, while the combination of steppe cavalry tactics with European infantry formations created flexible combined arms capabilities that could adapt to different battlefield conditions. The economic contributions of subject peoples were equally important to the success of the Hunnic Confederation. Slavic agricultural communities provided the food surpluses necessary to support large military forces during extended campaigns, while Germanic and other craftsmen produced the weapons, equipment, and luxury goods that served both practical and symbolic functions within Hunnic society. The integration of these different economic systems created a more resilient and diversified foundation for Hunnic power than would have been possible through reliance on traditional nomadic resources alone. The economic foundations of this expanding confederation were as important as its military capabilities, as the Huns developed sophisticated systems for extracting and redistributing resources across their territories. Tribute payments from subject peoples provided a steady stream of wealth that could be used to reward loyal followers, purchase necessary supplies, and fund military campaigns. The control of trade routes allowed Hunnic leaders to profit from commercial exchanges, while also gaining access to luxury goods and strategic materials that enhanced their prestige and power. The tribute system developed by the Huns was carefully calibrated to extract maximum resources while avoiding the economic disruption that could undermine the productive capacity of subject peoples. Tribute demands were typically set at levels that subject communities could meet without abandoning their traditional economic activities, ensuring the long-term sustainability of the system. This approach reflected a sophisticated understanding of economic principles that distinguished Hunnic administration from the more exploitative practices often employed by other conquering powers. The redistribution of tribute wealth within Hunnic society served important political and social functions beyond simple economic exchange. The ability to reward followers with valuable goods and privileges was essential to maintaining the loyalty and cooperation of the diverse groups that comprised the Confederation. The ceremonial distribution of tribute at important gatherings reinforced social hierarchies and political relationships, while demonstrating the power and generosity of Hunnic leadership. Archaeological evidence from Hunnic sites across Eastern and Central Europe reveals the extent and sophistication of these economic networks, with luxury goods from as far away as China and India appearing alongside local products in Hunnic burial contexts. The distribution of these materials suggests that Hunnic society had developed complex mechanisms for the allocation and display of wealth, with different categories of goods serving different social and political functions within the Confederation. The presence of Chinese silk, Indian gems, and Persian metalwork in Hunnic graves demonstrates the extent of the trade networks that connected the Confederation with distant regions of Asia. These luxury goods serve not only as symbols of wealth and status, but also as diplomatic gifts and tools for maintaining relationships with allies and vassals. The ability to access and distribute such exotic materials enhanced the prestige of Hunnic leaders and reinforced their claims to political authority. The archaeological record also reveals evidence of local craft production within Hunnic territories, with workshops producing distinctive styles of metalwork, jewelry, and weapons that combined steppe traditions with influences from subject peoples. This cultural synthesis created new artistic traditions that reflected the multicultural character of the Hunnic Confederation, while maintaining recognizable connections to nomadic heritage. The relationship between the Huns and the Roman Empire during this period was characterized by a complex mixture of conflict, cooperation, and mutual manipulation that reflected the sophisticated understanding of imperial politics that Hunnic leaders had developed. Rather than simply viewing Rome as an enemy to be conquered, the Huns recognized the empire as a potential source of wealth, prestige, and political advantage that could be exploited through careful diplomacy and strategic pressure. This approach required a deep understanding of Roman political structures, military capabilities, and economic resources, as well as the ability to adapt Hunnic strategies to the changing circumstances of imperial politics. The Hunnic approach to Roman relations was informed by decades of observation and interaction along the imperial frontiers. Hunnic leaders had developed detailed knowledge of Roman administrative procedures, military organization, and political culture through contacts with Gothic and other barbarian peoples who had extensive experience in dealing with imperial authorities. This intelligence network provided the Huns with crucial insights into Roman strengths and vulnerabilities that informed their diplomatic and military strategies. The Roman Empire represented both an opportunity and a challenge for Hunnic expansion. The wealth and resources of the empire were attractive targets for Hunnic raids and tribute demands, but the military capabilities and administrative sophistication of imperial forces posed significant obstacles to direct conquest. Hunnic leaders therefore developed strategies that sought to maximize the benefits of Roman contact, while minimizing the risks of direct confrontation. The first formal diplomatic contacts between Hunnic leaders and Roman officials established patterns of interaction that would persist for several generations, with both sides seeking to gain advantage through negotiation while maintaining the option of military action if diplomacy failed. Roman emperors and their advisors recognized the military threat posed by Hunnic forces, while also seeing opportunities to use Hunnic power against other barbarian enemies or rival claimants to imperial authority. This mutual recognition of potential benefits from cooperation created a foundation for diplomatic engagement that transcended the immediate military confrontations of the frontier. The development of formal diplomatic protocols between the Huns and Rome represented a significant evolution in barbarian imperial relations. Previous contacts between the empire and steppe peoples had typically been limited to military encounters or brief commercial exchanges, but the Hunnic Confederation possessed the political sophistication and organizational capacity necessary for sustained diplomatic engagement. The establishment of regular embassy exchanges and treaty negotiations marked a new phase in the relationship between nomadic and settled civilizations. The complexity of Hunnic-Roman diplomacy was reflected in the multiple levels at which negotiations took place. High-level diplomatic contacts between Hunnic kings and Roman emperors were supplemented by ongoing relationships between regional commanders, local administrators, and various intermediaries who facilitated communication and negotiation. This multi-layered diplomatic system provided flexibility and redundancy that helped maintain communication even during periods of military tension. The complexity of these diplomatic relationships is illustrated by the career of various Hunnic leaders who successfully navigated the treacherous waters of late Roman politics, forming alliances with different imperial factions while maintaining their independence and advancing their own interests. These leaders demonstrated remarkable political sophistication, understanding not only the formal structures of Roman government, but also the informal networks of influence and patronage that actually determined imperial policy. Their success in these endeavors contributed to the growing prestige and influence of Hunnic leadership within the broader barbarian world. The most successful Hunnic diplomats were those who understood that Roman politics was characterized by competing factions and interest groups rather than unified imperial policy. By identifying and cultivating relationships with different Roman political figures, Hunnic leaders could play various factions against each other while positioning themselves as valuable allies to whoever emerged victorious from imperial power struggles. This approach required careful intelligence gathering and sophisticated political judgment, but it offered the potential for significant gains with relatively limited risks. The reputation for diplomatic skill that Hunnic leaders developed enhanced their influence not only with Roman authorities, but also with other barbarian peoples who sought effective representation in their dealings with the empire. The ability to negotiate favorable terms with Roman officials became an important source of prestige and political authority within the barbarian world, contributing to the expansion of Hunnic influence beyond their immediate military capabilities. The military dimensions of Hunnic-Roman interaction were equally complex, involving not only direct confrontations between Hunnic and Roman forces, but also collaborative campaigns against common enemies and the incorporation of Hunnic units into imperial armies. Roman military commanders quickly recognized the value of Hunnic cavalry tactics and began to adapt their own strategies to incorporate lessons learned from encounters with steppe warfare. This process of military adaptation and innovation contributed to significant changes in late Roman military organization and tactics that would influence imperial warfare for generations to come. The incorporation of Hunnic military techniques into Roman practice represented one of the most significant military innovations of the late imperial period. Roman commanders had traditionally relied on disciplined infantry formations supported by auxiliary cavalry, but encounters with Hunnic forces demonstrated the effectiveness of mobile cavalry tactics in certain battlefield conditions. The adoption of Hunnic-style composite bows, cavalry equipment, and tactical formations enhanced Roman military capabilities while also creating new strategic possibilities. The collaborative military campaigns between Hunnic and Roman forces provided opportunities for intensive military exchange and learning. Roman officers who served alongside Hunnic commanders gained first-hand experience with steppe warfare techniques, while Hunnic leaders observed Roman organizational methods and logistical systems. These collaborative experiences contributed to the development of hybrid military systems that combined the best elements of both traditions. The social and cultural impacts of Hunnic expansion extended far beyond the immediate political and military consequences, as the movement of peoples and the establishment of new political relationships created opportunities for cultural exchange and synthesis on an unprecedented scale. The Hunnic Confederation brought together populations from across Eurasia, creating a cosmopolitan society that incorporated elements from Germanic, Slavic, Iranian, and Turkic traditions. This cultural diversity was reflected in everything from artistic styles and religious practices to linguistic influences and technological innovations. The cultural synthesis that emerged within the Hunnic Confederation was facilitated by the practical necessities of governing diverse populations with different traditions and customs. Hunnic leaders found it necessary to accommodate the religious practices, legal traditions, and social customs of their various subjects in order to maintain political stability and military effectiveness. This pragmatic approach to cultural diversity created an environment in which different traditions could coexist and influence each other. The linguistic impact of Hunnic expansion was particularly significant, as the Confederation served as a conduit for the transmission of vocabulary, grammatical structures, and linguistic concepts across vast geographical and cultural distances. The need for communication between different ethnic groups within the Confederation promoted the development of lingua francas and translation practices that facilitated cultural exchange. Many European languages still retain loanwords and structural influences that can be traced to this period of intensive cultural contact. The role of women in Hunnic society appears to have been particularly significant, with archaeological and literary evidence suggesting that women enjoyed considerable status and influence within the Confederation. High-status female burials containing weapons and luxury goods indicate that some women held important political and military positions, while accounts of diplomatic negotiations mention female leaders who played crucial roles in intertribal relations. This pattern of female participation in political and military affairs may have influenced the societies that came into contact with the Huns, contributing to changes in gender roles and social structures across the barbarian world. The prominence of women in Hunnic society reflected both steppe cultural traditions and the practical necessities of nomadic life. In nomadic societies, women typically played important roles in managing household resources, maintaining social relationships, and participating in economic activities. The military nature of Hunnic expansion may have enhanced these traditional roles, as women took on additional responsibilities for maintaining political alliances and managing territorial administration, while men were engaged in military campaigns. The influence of Hunnic gender practices on other European societies is difficult to trace directly, but there is evidence that contact with the Huns coincided with changes in the status and roles of women in various barbarian communities. Some Germanic societies appear to have adopted practices that enhanced female participation in political and economic activities, while certain Slavic communities developed new forms of social organization that reflected steppe influences. The religious dimensions of Hunnic expansion also had significant consequences for European development, as the movement of peoples brought different religious traditions into contact and created new opportunities for syncretism and conversion. While the Huns themselves appear to have maintained traditional shamanistic practices, their confederation included peoples who practiced various forms of Christianity, as well as adherents of Iranian and Germanic religious traditions. The interaction of these different belief systems contributed to the complex religious landscape of late antique Europe and influenced the eventual Christianization of many barbarian peoples. The religious tolerance that characterized Hunnic governance reflected both practical political considerations and traditional steppe attitudes toward spiritual diversity. Hunnic leaders recognized that attempts to impose religious uniformity on their diverse subjects would likely provoke resistance and undermine political stability. The pragmatic approach of allowing different communities to maintain their traditional religious practices while participating in the broader political and military activities of the Confederation proved to be an effective strategy for maintaining unity among diverse populations. The interaction between different religious traditions within the Hunnic sphere created opportunities for theological exchange and doctrinal development that influenced the evolution of European Christianity. Christian communities within the Confederation were exposed to alternative religious perspectives that challenged traditional assumptions and promoted theological innovation. The resulting synthesis of Christian and non-Christian elements contributed to the development of distinctive forms of barbarian Christianity that would influence European religious development for centuries. The technological innovations associated with Hunnic expansion had lasting impacts on European military and material culture, with advances in horse breeding, metalworking, and weapon design spreading throughout the continent as a result of cultural contact and military necessity. The famous Hunnic composite bow, with its superior range and power compared to contemporary European weapons, was widely copied and adapted by other peoples, while Hunnic techniques in horse training and cavalry tactics influenced military development across Europe and beyond. The composite bow represented one of the most significant technological transfers from the steppe world to Europe during this period. The construction of these weapons required specialized knowledge of materials and techniques that had been developed over centuries of nomadic warfare. The transmission of this technology to European craftsmen represented a major enhancement in military capabilities that influenced the development of medieval archery and siege warfare. The horse breeding techniques practiced by the Huns also had profound impacts on European military and agricultural development. Hunnic horses were bred for endurance, speed, and intelligence, qualities that made them superior to most European breeds for cavalry warfare. The introduction of these animals and breeding techniques enhanced the military capabilities of various European peoples, while also contributing to improvements in transportation and agricultural productivity. The establishment of Hunnic power in Europe also had significant implications for long-distance trade and economic development, as the Confederation's control over key routes between Asia and Europe facilitated commercial exchanges, while also creating new opportunities for taxation and profit. The Huns' understanding of the economic value of trade routes and their ability to provide security for merchants contributed to the expansion of commercial networks that connected diverse regions and populations across the continent. The Hunnic contribution to European trade development was particularly important in the context of the declining effectiveness of Roman commercial networks. As imperial authority weakened in many frontier regions, the Huns provided alternative mechanisms for maintaining commercial connections and ensuring the security of long-distance trade. The tribute and taxation systems developed by the Confederation created new sources of funding for commercial ventures, while also providing incentives for the expansion of trade networks. The commercial policies pursued by Hunnic leaders reflected their understanding of the economic foundations of political power. By facilitating trade and protecting merchants, the Huns enhanced their own revenues while also strengthening the economic foundations of their subject communities. This approach created positive feedback loops that reinforced political stability and military effectiveness while promoting economic growth and technological innovation. As Hunnic influence expanded westward, the Confederation began to develop more sophisticated administrative structures and diplomatic practices that reflected both the growing complexity of their territories and the need to manage relationships with an increasing number of different peoples and political entities. The evolution of Hunnic political organization from a relatively simple tribal confederation to a complex multi-ethnic empire represented one of the most remarkable political developments of the late ancient period, demonstrating the adaptability and innovation of steppe political traditions when applied to the governance of diverse settled populations. The administrative evolution of the Hunnic Confederation involved the gradual development of specialized institutions and procedures for managing different aspects of governance. Military organization, tribute collection, diplomatic relations, and judicial administration all required different types of expertise and institutional structures. The Huns demonstrated remarkable flexibility in adapting their traditional political practices to meet these new challenges, while maintaining the essential characteristics that had made their confederation successful. The diplomatic innovations developed by the Huns during this period of expansion had lasting influences on European political development. The Confederation's approach to international relations, with its emphasis on personal relationships, flexible agreements, and pragmatic accommodation of diverse interests, provided alternative models to the more rigid and hierarchical diplomatic traditions of the Roman Empire. These innovations would influence the development of medieval European diplomacy and international relations. The process of political centralization within the Hunnic Confederation was gradual and uneven, with different regions and populations maintaining varying degrees of autonomy while acknowledging the overall authority of Hunnic leadership. This flexible approach to governance allowed the Confederation to accommodate the diverse needs and traditions of its constituent peoples, while maintaining the unity necessary for effective military action and diplomatic negotiation. The success of this political model would influence later attempts at empire building among steppe peoples and contribute to the development of new forms of political organization in post-Roman Europe. The balance between centralization and autonomy within the Hunnic system reflected the practical challenges of governing vast territories with diverse populations, using the limited administrative resources available to nomadic societies. Hunnic leaders had to develop mechanisms for maintaining political unity and military effectiveness without creating the elaborate bureaucratic structures that characterized more settled civilizations. The solutions they developed demonstrated remarkable political creativity and adaptability. The federal character of Hunnic political organization provided important precedents for later European political development. The Confederation's approach to managing diversity while maintaining unity influenced the development of various medieval kingdoms and empires that faced similar challenges in governing ethnically and culturally diverse populations. The legacy of Hunnic political innovation can be traced in the institutional structures and governmental practices of many later European states. The cultural synthesis that emerged within the Hunnic Confederation represented a unique fusion of nomadic and settled traditions that created new forms of artistic expression, social organization, and technological innovation. Archaeological evidence from Hunnic sites reveals a remarkable diversity of cultural influences, with objects and practices from across Eurasia appearing in contexts that suggest both preservation of traditional forms and creative adaptation to new circumstances. This cultural creativity and adaptability would prove to be one of the most enduring legacies of the Hunnic period, influencing European development long after the Confederation itself had disappeared from the historical record. The artistic traditions that developed within the Hunnic sphere combined elements from various cultural sources to create distinctive new styles that reflected the multicultural character of the Confederation. Metalwork, jewelry, textiles, and other decorative arts incorporated motifs and techniques from Germanic, Slavic, Iranian, and Chinese traditions, creating synthetic forms that were recognizably Hunnic while maintaining connections to their diverse cultural sources. The preservation and transmission of cultural traditions within the Hunnic Confederation was facilitated by the Confederation's policy of cultural tolerance and accommodation. Rather than attempting to impose uniform cultural practices on their diverse subjects, Hunnic leaders encouraged the maintenance of traditional customs and practices while promoting interaction and exchange between different communities. This approach created an environment in which cultural innovation could flourish, while traditional knowledge and skills were preserved for future generations. The impact of Hunnic expansion on European demographic patterns was profound and lasting, as the movement and displacement of populations created new ethnic configurations that would shape regional development for centuries to come. The mixing of different peoples within the Hunnic sphere created opportunities for cultural exchange and intermarriage that contributed to the emergence of new ethnic identities and social structures. These demographic changes were particularly significant in the regions that would later become Hungary, Romania, and the Balkans, where the legacy of Hunnic settlement and cultural influence can still be traced in archaeological and linguistic evidence. The demographic transformation of Central and Eastern Europe during the Hunnic period represented one of the most significant population movements in European history. The displacement, migration, and resettlement of entire peoples created new ethnic and cultural configurations that would influence regional development for centuries. The legacy of these demographic changes can be seen in the complex ethnic geography of modern Eastern Europe, where the boundaries between different cultural and linguistic groups still reflect patterns established during the age of Hunnic expansion. The long-term consequences of Hunnic expansion extended far beyond the immediate political and military impacts, creating foundations for medieval European development that would influence the continent's history for centuries to come. The Hunnic period marked a crucial transition between the ancient and medieval worlds, establishing patterns of cultural interaction, political organization, and economic development that would shape European civilization throughout the Middle Ages and beyond. The rise of Attila to supreme leadership of the Hunnic Confederation marked the beginning of the most dramatic and consequential period in Hunnic history. Following the death of his uncle Rugila around 434, Attila initially shared power with his brother Bleda, but their joint rule was characterized by increasing tension and competing visions for the future of their people. The sources suggest that while Bleda favored a more cautious approach to expansion and diplomacy, Preferring to consolidate existing gains and maintain stable relationships with neighboring powers, Attila possessed an aggressive ambition that would ultimately reshape the political landscape of 5th century Europe. The fundamental differences between the two brothers reflected broader tensions within Hunnic society about the proper direction for their expanding confederation. Bleda represented the traditional approach of nomadic leadership, emphasizing the importance of maintaining tribal unity through consensus and gradual expansion that would not overextend their resources. His supporters argued that the Hunnic Confederation had already achieved remarkable success under Rugala's leadership, and that further aggressive expansion risked provoking a coordinated response from the Roman empires that could threaten their very survival. Attila, by contrast, embodied a revolutionary vision that saw the current moment as a unique opportunity to achieve something unprecedented in nomadic history. He recognized that the Roman empires were weakened by internal conflicts, economic difficulties, and military pressures from multiple directions, creating a window of opportunity that might not remain open indefinitely. His vision extended beyond traditional nomadic goals of raiding and tribute collection to encompass the possibility of establishing permanent Hunnic dominance over vast settled territories, fundamentally altering the balance of power in the known world. The circumstances surrounding Bleda's death around 45 remain shrouded in mystery, though most historical accounts suggest that Attila orchestrated his brother's elimination to secure undivided control over the Hunnic Confederation. Contemporary sources provide conflicting accounts of the event, with some describing a hunting accident while others hint at more deliberate action. The timing of Bleda's death, occurring just as tensions between the brothers had reached a critical point, has led most historians to conclude that Attila's involvement was likely, though the exact circumstances may never be fully known. This consolidation of power represented more than a simple succession dispute, as it marked the emergence of a new model of Hunnic leadership that concentrated unprecedented authority in the hands of a single ruler. Traditional nomadic governance had typically involved shared leadership among multiple chiefs, with decisions made through consultation and consensus building among tribal elders. Attila's assumption of sole command transformed the Hunnic Confederation from a loose alliance of tribes into a centralized empire capable of coordinating massive military campaigns across vast distances and implementing consistent policies throughout their territories. The transformation of Hunnic governance under Attila required the development of new administrative structures that could manage the complex challenges of ruling such a diverse and geographically dispersed confederation. He established a hierarchy of trusted lieutenants who could act with considerable autonomy while remaining accountable to central authority, creating a system that balanced local flexibility with overall strategic coordination. These administrators were often drawn from various ethnic backgrounds, reflecting Attila's pragmatic approach to governance that valued competence over tribal affiliation. Under Attila's leadership, the Hunnic military machine reached new levels of sophistication and effectiveness that transformed them from a formidable but predictable nomadic force into a truly revolutionary military power. The traditional Hunnic advantages of mobility and archery were enhanced through improved coordination between different tribal contingents and the systematic integration of siege warfare techniques learned from contacts with settled populations. This evolution reflected years of careful observation and adaptation, as Hunnic commanders studied the military practices of their enemies and incorporated the most effective elements into their own tactical systems. The development of Hunnic siege warfare capabilities represented a particularly significant innovation that fundamentally altered the strategic balance in 5th century Europe. Traditional nomadic forces had been largely ineffective against fortified positions, limiting their ability to capture and hold important urban centers. Attila's armies became capable of conducting complex siege operations that could reduce even the most formidable fortifications, opening up previously secure territories to Hunnic conquest and demonstrating that no defensive position could be considered truly safe from their assault. The integration of diverse military traditions within Attila's forces created a synergistic effect that made the Hunnic army far more formidable than the sum of its individual components. Germanic warriors contributed their expertise in close combat and siege warfare, while Roman deserters provided knowledge of imperial military organization and tactics. Alan and Sarmatian contingents brought their own cavalry traditions, while various other peoples added specialized skills in areas such as engineering and logistics. This military multiculturalism created an adaptive and flexible force that could respond effectively to a wide range of tactical challenges. Attila's armies became capable of conducting complex multi-front campaigns that could simultaneously threaten targets separated by hundreds of miles, creating a strategic flexibility that consistently confounded his enemies. This capability required not only superior military organization, but also sophisticated intelligence networks that could provide accurate information about enemy movements and intentions. The Hunnic intelligence system drew upon merchants, diplomats, and other travelers who moved freely throughout the Roman world, creating an information network that often provided Attila with better knowledge of imperial affairs than the emperors themselves possessed. The expansion of Hunnic power under Attila was facilitated by his remarkable ability to forge alliances with diverse groups of warriors and adventurers drawn from across the known world. His court became a cosmopolitan center that attracted Germanic nobles seeking opportunities for advancement, Roman deserters fleeing military service or political persecution, and ambitious individuals from numerous other peoples who saw opportunity in service to the rising Hunnic power. This diverse following provided Attila with valuable intelligence about the internal affairs of his enemies, while also supplying specialized military expertise that enhanced Hunnic capabilities in previously unfamiliar areas. The attraction of Attila's court for such diverse followers reflected both his personal charisma and the genuine opportunities for advancement that service to the Hunnic king could provide. Unlike the rigid social hierarchies of the Roman empires, where advancement was often limited by birth and social status, Attila's meritocratic approach allowed capable individuals to rise rapidly through the ranks based on their contributions to Hunnic success. This openness to talent from all sources created a dynamic and innovative environment that fostered military and administrative excellence. The diplomatic revolution initiated by Attila transformed the Hunnic relationship with the Roman Empire from one of occasional conflict and tribute collection to systematic extortion on an unprecedented scale. Beginning in the early 440s, Attila's representatives appeared regularly at the imperial courts in Constantinople and Ravenna, demanding increasingly large payments in exchange for peace. These demands were backed by the credible threat of devastating military campaigns that could strike at the heart of Roman territory with little warning, creating a situation where the emperors found themselves essentially paying protection money to avoid Hunnic attacks. The sophistication of Attila's diplomatic approach reflected his deep understanding of Roman psychology and the internal dynamics of imperial politics. He recognized that the emperors were often more concerned with immediate threats than long-term strategic planning, making them willing to pay substantial sums to postpone conflicts even when such payments ultimately strengthened their enemies. This insight allowed Attila to extract enormous wealth from the Roman empires, while simultaneously building up his military capabilities for future campaigns. The famous embassy of Maximinus and Priscus to Attila's court in 49 provides invaluable insight into the sophisticated diplomatic apparatus that the Hunnic king had developed. The detailed account left by Priscus reveals a court ceremony and protocol that rivaled those of the established empires, complete with elaborate feasts, formal audiences, and complex negotiations conducted through multiple intermediaries. The physical setting of these diplomatic encounters was carefully designed to impress visitors with Hunnic wealth and power, featuring luxurious furnishings, exotic foods, and displays of tribute from subject peoples. This diplomatic sophistication reflected Attila's understanding that lasting success required not merely military victory, but also the ability to project power and legitimacy through ceremonial display and political theater. The elaborate nature of Hunnic court ceremonies served multiple purposes, demonstrating wealth and power to foreign visitors, while also reinforcing the loyalty of Hunnic nobles and allies through participation in impressive displays of their leaders' status. These ceremonies drew upon traditions from various cultures, creating a unique synthesis that reflected the cosmopolitan nature of Attila's empire. The economic foundations of Attila's empire rested on a combination of tribute extraction, trade control, and the systematic exploitation of conquered territories that created a remarkably sophisticated system of resource management. The regular payments demanded from both the Eastern and Western Roman empires provided a steady stream of gold and luxury goods that could be redistributed to maintain the loyalty of tribal leaders and warriors. These tribute payments often exceeded the annual tax revenues of entire Roman provinces, demonstrating the enormous economic burden that Hunnic demands placed on the imperial treasuries. Simultaneously, Hunnic control over key trade routes allowed Attila to profit from commercial activities, while also gathering intelligence about the movements and intentions of potential enemies. The strategic location of Hunnic territories across Central Europe meant that many important commercial connections between different regions of the continent passed through areas under their influence, providing opportunities for taxation and regulation that generated substantial revenues. This control over trade networks also gave Attila significant leverage in diplomatic negotiations, as he could threaten to disrupt commercial activities that were vital to the economic well-being of his neighbors. The administrative challenges of governing such a vast and diverse confederation required innovations in communication and control that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in the pre-modern world. Attila's solution involved the creation of a network of trusted lieutenants who could act with considerable autonomy while remaining accountable to central authority through regular reporting and periodic assemblies. This system allowed for rapid response to local crises while maintaining overall strategic coordination, though it also created potential vulnerabilities that would later contribute to the empire's fragmentation following Attila's death. The communication systems developed under Attila's rule represented a remarkable achievement in pre-modern administration, utilizing mounted messengers who could traverse vast distances with remarkable speed and reliability. These communication networks were supplemented by a system of signal fires and other methods that could relay important information across hundreds of miles in a matter of hours. The effectiveness of these systems was crucial to maintaining unity and coordination within the far-flung Hunnic Confederation, allowing Attila to respond quickly to threats or opportunities wherever they might arise. The cultural impact of Attila's reign extended far beyond the immediate political and military sphere, as his court became a center for the exchange of ideas, technologies, and artistic traditions from across Eurasia. The cosmopolitan nature of his following meant that innovations in metalworking, textile production, and other crafts could spread rapidly throughout the Hunnic territories and beyond. Archaeological evidence suggests that the period of Attila's rule witnessed significant advances in the quality and sophistication of material culture throughout the regions under Hunnic influence, reflecting the creative synthesis that occurred when diverse traditions encountered one another. The artistic achievements of the Hunnic period demonstrate a remarkable fusion of different cultural traditions that created distinctive new forms of expression. Hunnic metalwork, in particular, shows evidence of influences from Roman, Germanic, Persian, and Central Asian traditions, combined in ways that produced objects of extraordinary beauty and craftsmanship. These artistic innovations were not merely decorative, but served important social and political functions, reinforcing status hierarchies and cultural identities within the diverse Hunnic Confederation. The religious and ideological dimensions of Attila's leadership reflected the complex spiritual landscape of 5th century Europe, as the Hunnic king skillfully navigated between different religious traditions while maintaining his own people's shamanistic practices. Contemporary sources describe Attila's possession of what he claimed was the Sword of Mars, a legendary weapon that supposedly conferred divine authority upon its bearer. Whether genuine or fabricated, this sacred sword became a powerful symbol of Attila's legitimacy and divine favor that helped to unite his diverse followers under a common cause. The religious tolerance displayed by Attila's administration was both pragmatic and strategic, recognizing that attempts to impose religious uniformity on such a diverse confederation would likely provoke resistance and rebellion. Instead, Attila allowed various peoples within his empire to maintain their traditional religious practices, while also encouraging the development of syncretic traditions that could serve as unifying elements. This approach created a complex religious landscape within the Hunnic Empire that reflected the broader cultural diversity of Attila's following. The peak of Attila's power in the early 450s coincided with a period of unprecedented weakness in both the Eastern and Western Roman empires, creating opportunities that he exploited with remarkable skill and timing. Internal conflicts between different factions within the imperial courts, economic difficulties caused by the disruption of trade and taxation, and military pressures from multiple barbarian peoples created a situation where the emperors were increasingly unable to respond effectively to external threats. This convergence of Roman weakness and Hunnic strength created the conditions for Attila's most ambitious campaigns. His ability to coordinate simultaneous threats against both imperial capitals demonstrated a strategic vision that few contemporary rulers could match. While his success in extracting massive tribute payments revealed the extent to which Roman power had declined, the emperors found themselves in the humiliating position of competing with each other to secure Attila's favor, offering increasingly generous terms in hopes of directing his attention toward their rivals. This competition between the two imperial courts provided Attila with additional leverage that he exploited with consummate diplomatic skill. The famous invasion of Gaul in 451 represented the culmination of Attila's ambitions and the high watermark of Hunnic expansion into Western Europe. The campaign began with careful diplomatic preparation, as Attila sought to isolate his enemies and secure the neutrality or support of various Germanic peoples who might otherwise oppose his advance. These diplomatic efforts were largely successful, with several important Germanic groups either remaining neutral or actively supporting the Hunnic invasion, significantly reducing the potential opposition that Attila would face. The systematic reduction of fortified positions along the Rhine frontier demonstrated the evolution of Hunnic military capabilities and their mastery of siege warfare against some of the most formidable defensive installations of the late Roman world. Cities that had withstood previous barbarian attacks found themselves unable to resist the sophisticated siege techniques employed by Attila's forces, which combined traditional nomadic mobility with advanced engineering knowledge acquired through contact with settled populations. The fall of cities such as Metz and Reims sent shockwaves throughout Gaul and Italy, as populations that had felt secure behind their walls suddenly found themselves vulnerable to Hunnic assault. The psychological impact of these early successes was perhaps as important as their military significance, as news of Hunnic victories spread rapidly throughout the Western Empire and created a climate of fear and desperation. Many cities surrendered without resistance upon learning of Attila's approach, while others were abandoned by their populations who fled toward what they hoped would be safer territories. This psychological warfare was a deliberate element of Attila's strategy, designed to maximize the impact of his military actions while minimizing the resistance he would encounter. The siege and destruction of numerous Gallic cities during this campaign showcased the evolution of Hunnic military capabilities under Attila's leadership and demonstrated their ability to adapt traditional nomadic warfare to the challenges of fighting against fortified positions. Traditional accounts of nomadic warfare emphasized mobility and raids, but Attila's forces proved equally capable of conducting prolonged sieges that reduced even the most formidable fortifications through a combination of direct assault, siege engines, and psychological pressure. This tactical flexibility reflected years of experience fighting against settled populations and the integration of engineering expertise acquired through contact with Roman and Germanic military traditions. The logistical achievements of the Gallic campaign were as impressive as its military successes, as Attila managed to supply and coordinate a massive army operating far from its base territories for an extended period. This required sophisticated planning and organization that challenged traditional assumptions about nomadic military capabilities, demonstrating that the Hunnic Confederation had developed administrative and logistical systems that rivaled those of the established empires. The ability to maintain such a large force in the field for months at a time represented a quantum leap in nomadic military organization. The response to Attila's invasion revealed both the continued resilience of Roman military organization and the desperate nature of the empire's situation. The Western Roman general Aetius managed to assemble a coalition that included not only regular Roman troops but also various Germanic peoples who recognized that Hunnic victory would threaten their own independence. This alliance represented one of the last great collaborative efforts of the Western Roman Empire, bringing together former enemies in a common cause against the Hunnic threat, though the fragile nature of this coalition was evident throughout the campaign. The diplomatic efforts required to assemble this anti-Hunnic coalition demonstrated the complexity of 5th century European politics and the web of relationships that connected different peoples across the continent. Aetius had to overcome decades of mistrust and conflict between Romans and various Germanic groups, while also managing the competing interests and ambitions of his various allies. The success of these diplomatic efforts, though temporary, showed that the Western Empire still possessed considerable political resources when properly mobilized. The Battle of the Catalaunian Plains, fought in the summer of 451, stands as one of the most significant military engagements of the 5th century and a turning point in European history. The scale of the conflict was unprecedented, with contemporary sources describing armies that numbered in the hundreds of thousands and battlefield casualties that reached catastrophic proportions. The tactical complexity of the engagement, involving multiple allied contingents on both sides, required levels of coordination and communication that pushed ancient military organization to its limits and demonstrated the sophisticated nature of 5th century warfare. The battle itself was characterized by fierce fighting across a broad front, with different sections of the opposing armies experiencing varying degrees of success throughout the day. The Hunnic forces initially gained advantages in some sectors, breaking through enemy lines and threatening to achieve a decisive victory, but the resilience of the Roman-Germanic coalition and the tactical skill of commanders like Attila prevented a complete collapse. The fighting continued from dawn until dusk, with neither side able to achieve the decisive breakthrough that would have ended the conflict. The outcome of the battle, while often described as a Roman victory, was more accurately a costly stalemate that demonstrated the limits of both Hunnic and Roman power. Attila's withdrawal from Gaul was strategic rather than a rout, as his forces remained intact and capable of future operations despite the heavy casualties they had suffered. The Hunnic army retreated in good order, maintaining its cohesion and discipline even in the face of defeat, demonstrating the quality of Attila's military organization and the loyalty of his followers. Similarly, the heavy casualties suffered by the Roman coalition meant that Aetius lacked the strength to pursue and destroy the retreating Hunnic army, allowing Attila to preserve his military capabilities for future campaigns. The Pyrrhic nature of the Roman victory was evident in the immediate aftermath of the battle, as the coalition forces were too weakened to exploit their success or to prevent future Hunnic incursions. This outcome highlighted the fundamental problem facing the Western Roman Empire. Even when successful, their military efforts consumed resources that could not easily be replaced. The aftermath of the Gallic campaign revealed the strategic genius of Attila's approach to warfare and diplomacy, as he demonstrated an ability to learn from setbacks and adapt his strategies accordingly. Rather than becoming bogged down in a prolonged occupation of territories that would be difficult to hold and would expose his forces to continued attrition, he withdrew to his base areas while maintaining the threat of future invasions. This strategy kept his enemies in a state of constant anxiety, while preserving Hunnic strength for more profitable ventures, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of the relationship between military power and political influence. The withdrawal from Gaul also allowed Attila to reassess his strategic situation and consider alternative approaches to achieving his goals. The resistance he had encountered in Gaul, while not decisive, had demonstrated that coordinated opposition could limit Hunnic success and impose significant costs on his forces. This experience influenced his planning for future campaigns, leading to modifications in his tactical approach and diplomatic strategy that would be evident in his subsequent invasion of Italy. The invasion of northern Italy in 452 represented Attila's most audacious campaign and brought Hunnic forces closer to the heart of the Western Roman Empire than ever before. The decision to invade Italy reflected both Attila's continued ambitions and his assessment that the Italian peninsula might prove more vulnerable than Gaul had been. The systematic reduction of cities such as Aquileia, Padua, and Milan demonstrated that even the most prosperous and well-defended regions of the empire were vulnerable to Hunnic assault, sending shockwaves throughout the Mediterranean world. The siege of Aquileia became particularly notorious for its duration and the completeness of the city's eventual destruction. The city had been considered one of the strongest fortresses in northern Italy, with massive walls and a strategic location that had previously made it virtually impregnable. The fact that Attila's forces were able to capture and destroy such a formidable position demonstrated the continued evolution of Hunnic siege capabilities and sent a clear message about the vulnerability of other Italian cities. The destruction wrought during this campaign was so severe that some cities never fully recovered, fundamentally altering the urban landscape of northern Italy and contributing to the economic decline that characterized the late Western Roman Empire. The systematic nature of this destruction suggests that it was not merely the result of military necessity, but reflected a deliberate policy designed to break the economic and political power of the region. This scorched earth approach maximized the psychological impact of the invasion while also eliminating potential centers of future resistance. The famous meeting between Attila and Pope Leo I outside Rome has become one of the most celebrated episodes in the history of late antiquity, though the actual circumstances and outcome remain subjects of scholarly debate. The traditional account describes the Pope's successful persuasion of Attila to spare Rome through a combination of moral authority and divine intervention. But more pragmatic explanations point to factors such as disease in the Hunnic army, supply difficulties, and the approach of Eastern Roman reinforcements. Regardless of the specific reasons, Attila's decision to withdraw from Italy without attacking Rome represented a crucial turning point that preserved the city for posterity. The diplomatic encounter between these two remarkable figures represented a confrontation between different worldviews and value systems that encapsulated many of the broader tensions of 5th century Europe. Leo represented the growing power and influence of the Christian Church, while Attila embodied the dynamic energy of the nomadic peoples who were reshaping the continent's political landscape. Their meetings symbolized the complex negotiations and accommodations that were necessary as these different forces sought to coexist in an increasingly interconnected world. The final years of Attila's reign were marked by continued diplomatic maneuvering and military preparations that suggested he was planning even more ambitious campaigns than those he had already undertaken. His negotiations with both Roman empires became increasingly demanding, while intelligence reports described massive preparations for what appeared to be a coordinated assault on Constantinople itself. The scope of these preparations indicated that Attila envisioned nothing less than the complete conquest of the Eastern Roman Empire and the establishment of Hunnic rule over the entire Eastern Mediterranean. These grandiose plans reflected Attila's assessment that the moment was ripe for a final decisive blow against Roman power. The Western Empire had been severely weakened by his previous campaigns and appeared incapable of mounting effective resistance, while the Eastern Empire was distracted by religious controversies and internal political conflicts. The coordination of a massive assault against Constantinople would require unprecedented logistical planning and military organization, but Attila had demonstrated his capability to manage such complex operations throughout his career. The sudden death of Attila in 453, reportedly on his wedding night to a young Germanic bride named Ildiko, brought an abrupt end to these grandiose plans and initiated the rapid disintegration of the Hunnic Empire. The circumstances of his death remain mysterious, with accounts ranging from natural causes to assassination. But the immediate consequence was clear. Without Attila's unifying presence and strategic vision, the diverse elements of his confederation began to fragment almost immediately. The timing of his death, occurring at the height of his power and influence, created a power vacuum that his successors were unable to fill. The wedding feast that preceded Attila's death had been intended as a celebration of Hunnic power and a demonstration of the king's continued vitality and authority. Instead, it became the setting for one of history's most consequential deaths, as the sudden loss of their supreme leader left the Hunnic Confederation without clear direction or unified command. The symbolic significance of Attila's death on what should have been a night of triumph and celebration was not lost on contemporary observers, who saw it as evidence of divine intervention in human affairs. The succession crisis that followed Attila's death revealed the fundamental weakness of the Hunnic political system, which depended heavily on the personal authority and charisma of a single leader rather than on institutional structures that could provide continuity. His sons, Elak, Dengizic, and Ernak, attempted to maintain control over the confederation, but they lacked their father's ability to balance competing interests and maintain the loyalty of diverse tribal groups. The resulting power struggle created opportunities for subject peoples to assert their independence and for external enemies to exploit Hunnic divisions. The division of authority among Attila's sons reflected traditional nomadic practices of inheritance, but it proved catastrophically inappropriate for the complex empire that Attila had created. Each son controlled different territories and tribal groups, but none possessed the overall authority or strategic vision necessary to maintain unity within the confederation. This fragmentation was compounded by personal rivalries and competing claims to legitimacy that prevented effective coordination even in the face of external threats. The Battle of Nidau in 454 marked the effective end of Hunnic dominance in Central Europe, as a coalition of Germanic peoples led by the Gepids decisively defeated the forces of Elek and his brothers. This engagement demonstrated how quickly the military balance could shift when the Hunnic Confederation lost its unity and coordination, as peoples who had been subject to Hunnic rule for generations suddenly found themselves capable of successful resistance. The death of Elek in the battle eliminated Attila's most capable successor and left the remaining Hunnic forces leaderless and demoralized. The coalition that defeated the Huns at Nidau represented a remarkable reversal of the political dynamics that had characterized Central Europe during Attila's reign. Germanic peoples who had previously competed with one another for Hunnic favor now united in common cause against their former overlords, demonstrating the artificial nature of Hunnic dominance and the underlying resentment that had been building during years of subjugation. The success of this coalition inspired similar revolts throughout the former Hunnic territories, accelerating the collapse of the Confederation. The aftermath of Nidau witnessed a massive redistribution of power and territory throughout Central and Eastern Europe, as peoples who had been subject to Hunnic rule for generations suddenly found themselves free to pursue their own destinies. The Gepids established themselves as the dominant power in the Middle Danube region, while other Germanic groups such as the Rugians and Skiri carved out their own territories from the fragments of Attila's empire. This political fragmentation created a complex mosaic of competing kingdoms and tribal confederations that would characterize the region for centuries to come. The speed and completeness of the Hunnic collapse surprised contemporary observers and demonstrated the extent to which their empire had depended on the personal authority of Attila and the fear that his name inspired. Without these unifying elements, the diverse peoples who had comprised the Hunnic Confederation quickly reverted to their traditional loyalties and rivalries, making coordinated resistance to the Germanic uprising impossible. The rapidity of this transformation highlighted the artificial nature of nomadic empires and their vulnerability to succession crises. The surviving Hunnic groups faced the challenge of adapting to a dramatically changed political landscape in which they were no longer the dominant power but merely one among many competing peoples. Some, led by Dengizich, attempted to maintain traditional nomadic practices while seeking new opportunities for raiding and tribute collection, but they found that their former victims were now better organized and more capable of effective resistance. Others, following Ernak, chose to accept Byzantine subsidies and settle in territories assigned by the imperial government, beginning a process of gradual integration into the established political order of the Eastern Roman Empire. The integration of former Hunnic groups into the Byzantine system represented a pragmatic solution that benefited both parties, as the empire gained experienced warriors for its armies while the Huns received security and regular payments in exchange for military service. This arrangement reflected the empire's traditional policy of managing barbarian peoples through a combination of subsidies, military employment, and territorial grants. But it also marked the end of Hunnic independence and their transformation from conquerors to mercenaries. The long-term consequences of the Hunnic collapse extended far beyond the immediate political and military sphere, fundamentally altering the demographic and cultural landscape of Central and Eastern Europe in ways that would influence the continent's development for centuries. The end of Hunnic unity allowed previously suppressed ethnic and tribal identities to reassert themselves, leading to the emergence of new political entities that would play crucial roles in medieval European development. The kingdoms established by the Gepids, Lombards, and other Germanic peoples in the aftermath of Hunnic collapse became important actors in the complex political dynamics of the 6th and 7th centuries. The demographic changes that followed the Hunnic collapse were particularly significant, as the breakdown of centralized control allowed for large-scale population movements that redistributed peoples throughout Central and Eastern Europe. Some groups returned to territories from which they had been displaced during the period of Hunnic expansion, while others settled in new regions that offered better opportunities for economic development. These population movements created new ethnic and cultural configurations that would influence European development long after the political structures of the early medieval period had disappeared. The cultural legacy of the Hunnic Empire proved remarkably durable despite its political fragmentation, as elements of Hunnic material culture, military organization, and artistic traditions continued to influence European development long after the disappearance of Hunnic political power. Archaeological evidence reveals the persistence of Hunnic-style metalwork, weaponry, and decorative arts throughout regions that had once been part of Attila's empire, suggesting that cultural exchange and technological transfer continued even after political unity was lost. This cultural continuity demonstrated the depth of Hunnic influence and the creative synthesis that had occurred during their period of dominance. The artistic traditions that developed during the Hunnic period represented a unique fusion of different cultural influences that created distinctive new forms of expression. The so-called polychrome style, characterized by the use of garnets and other precious stones in elaborate settings, became particularly widespread throughout Europe and continued to influence artistic development well into the medieval period. This artistic legacy provided a visual reminder of the Hunnic achievement and helped to preserve memory of their empire long after its political structures had vanished. The impact of Hunnic expansion on European linguistic development represents one of the most enduring aspects of their legacy, as Hunnic contact with various Indo-European peoples resulted in significant vocabulary borrowing and grammatical influences that can still be detected in modern European languages. Hungarian, in particular, preserves numerous elements that may derive from ancient Hunnic linguistic traditions, though the exact nature of these connections remains a subject of ongoing scholarly investigation and debate. The linguistic evidence suggests that Hunnic influence was far more pervasive and long-lasting than the relatively brief duration of their political dominance might suggest. The study of linguistic borrowing during the Hunnic period has revealed the complex processes of cultural exchange that occurred when nomadic and settled peoples encountered one another under conditions that promoted sustained contact. Words related to military organization, political authority, and material culture show particular evidence of Hunnic influence, reflecting the areas where their impact was most significant. These linguistic traces provide valuable evidence for understanding the nature of Hunnic society and their relationships with other peoples. The military innovations pioneered during the Hunnic period continued to influence European warfare long after the collapse of Attila's empire, as the tactical and strategic lessons learned through contact with Hunnic forces were incorporated into the military traditions of successor peoples. The emphasis on mobility, the integration of different weapon systems, and the coordination of diverse military contingents became standard features of early medieval warfare throughout much of Europe. The Hunnic example demonstrated the effectiveness of combined arms tactics and influenced the development of military organization among both Germanic and Byzantine forces. The siege warfare techniques developed by the Huns represented a particularly important innovation that transformed the nature of medieval warfare. Their ability to reduce fortified positions that had previously been considered impregnable forced defensive planners to reconsider their strategies and led to improvements in fortification design and garrison organization. The psychological impact of Hunnic siege capabilities also influenced military thinking, as commanders recognized that no position could be considered absolutely secure against a determined and well-equipped enemy. The diplomatic and administrative practices developed during the height of Hunnic power also left lasting impressions on European political development, as rulers throughout the continent adopted elements of Hunnic court ceremony, tribute systems, and administrative organization. The concept of a supreme ruler commanding the loyalty of diverse peoples through a combination of military prowess, diplomatic skill, and ceremonial display became a model that influenced the development of medieval kingship throughout Europe. This political legacy was particularly evident in the emergence of new Germanic kingdoms that sought to recreate the unity and authority that Attila had achieved. The tribute systems pioneered by the Huns provided a model for later medieval rulers who sought to extract resources from subject populations without the expense and difficulty of direct administration. The Hunnic example demonstrated that systematic tribute collection could provide enormous revenues while also serving political purposes by reinforcing relationships of dominance and subordination. This approach influenced the development of feudal relationships and the complex web of obligations that characterized medieval European society. The economic networks established during the Hunnic period created commercial and cultural connections that persisted long after the political structures that originally fostered them had disappeared. Trade routes that had been developed to serve Hunnic interests continued to facilitate exchange between different regions of Europe, while the movement of craftsmen, merchants, and other specialists during the Hunnic period created lasting links between previously isolated communities. These economic connections contributed to the gradual integration of European markets and the development of commercial relationships that would prove crucial to medieval economic development. The commercial impact of the Hunnic period extended beyond simple trade relationships to encompass the transfer of technologies, techniques, and cultural practices that enriched the societies that participated in these networks. The cosmopolitan nature of Attila's court had encouraged innovation and experimentation, creating an environment where different traditions could encounter and influence one another. This legacy of cultural exchange continued to influence European development long after the political circumstances that had originally fostered it had changed. The religious and ideological impact of the Hunnic Empire reflected the complex spiritual landscape of 5th century Europe, as contact between Hunnic shamanism and various forms of Christianity created new syncretic traditions that influenced religious development throughout the region. The tolerance shown by Hunnic rulers toward different religious practices established precedents for religious diversity that would prove important in the development of medieval European Christianity. This legacy of religious pluralism provided a foundation for the complex theological and political accommodations that characterized the medieval church. The shamanistic traditions of the Huns introduced new spiritual concepts and practices that were gradually incorporated into local religious traditions throughout their former territories. These influences can be detected in various folk traditions and religious practices that persisted well into the medieval period, suggesting that Hunnic spiritual traditions had a more lasting impact than their political structures. The synthesis of nomadic and settled religious traditions created new forms of spirituality that enriched the religious landscape of medieval Europe. The archaeological record of the Hunnic period provides compelling evidence for the profound cultural transformation that occurred throughout Central and Eastern Europe during the 5th century. Burial practices, settlement patterns, and material culture all show clear evidence of Hunnic influence, while also demonstrating the creative adaptation of Hunnic traditions by local populations. This archaeological evidence suggests that the Hunnic impact was far more complex and nuanced than simple conquest and domination, involving extensive cultural exchange and mutual influence between different peoples. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed the sophisticated nature of Hunnic material culture and the high level of craftsmanship achieved by their artisans. Excavations at sites associated with Hunnic presence have uncovered elaborate burial goods, sophisticated metalwork, and evidence of extensive trade connections that demonstrate the wealth and cultural achievement of Attila's empire. These discoveries have forced scholars to revise their understanding of nomadic societies and recognize the complexity of Hunnic civilization. The historiographical tradition surrounding the Huns and Attila has evolved significantly over the centuries, reflecting changing political circumstances and scholarly methodologies. Medieval chroniclers often portrayed the Huns as instruments of divine wrath sent to punish a sinful world, while Renaissance humanists emphasized their role in the fall of classical civilization. Modern scholarship has attempted to move beyond these moralistic interpretations to develop a more nuanced understanding of Hunnic society and its impact on European development, though popular perceptions continue to be influenced by earlier stereotypes. The challenge of interpreting Hunnic history is complicated by the limited and often biased nature of the available sources, most of which were written by their enemies or by peoples who encountered them only briefly. The lack of indigenous Hunnic written records means that our understanding of their society, beliefs, and motivations must be reconstructed from external accounts, archaeological evidence, and comparative analysis with other nomadic peoples. This methodological challenge has led to ongoing debates about fundamental aspects of Hunnic history and culture, with new discoveries regularly challenging established interpretations. The comparative study of nomadic empires has provided valuable context for understanding the Hunnic achievement and its place in world history. The Hunnic Empire shares important characteristics with other great nomadic confederations such as the Mongol Empire, including the ability to unite diverse peoples under centralized leadership, the development of sophisticated military and administrative systems, and the creation of extensive commercial and cultural networks. These comparisons help to place the Hunnic Empire within the broader context of nomadic state formation and expansion, revealing common patterns and unique innovations. The environmental and climatic factors that influenced Hunnic expansion and development represent an important but often overlooked aspect of their history. Changes in precipitation patterns, temperature fluctuations, and the availability of pasture land all played crucial roles in determining the timing and direction of Hunnic movements. Understanding these environmental influences helps to explain why Hunnic expansion occurred when it did, and why certain regions proved more attractive than others for settlement and exploitation. Climate change may have been a significant factor in driving the initial Hunnic migrations from Central Asia and in shaping their subsequent interactions with settled populations. The legacy of the Hunnic Empire in modern European consciousness reflects the enduring fascination with this dramatic period of history and its larger-than-life protagonists. Attila, in particular, has become a figure of legend whose historical reality has often been overshadowed by mythological and literary interpretations. This cultural legacy demonstrates the continuing relevance of Hunnic history for understanding European identity and the complex processes of cultural formation and transformation that have shaped the continent's development. The study of Hunnic history offers valuable insights into the dynamics of cultural contact and exchange in the ancient world, revealing how seemingly disparate peoples could interact, adapt, and influence one another in ways that fundamentally shape the course of human development. The Hunnic period represents a crucial transition between the ancient and medieval worlds, a time when established patterns of civilization were challenged and transformed through contact with dynamic and innovative nomadic peoples. This historical moment demonstrates the importance of cultural boundaries as spaces of creativity and innovation, rather than simply barriers to communication. The ultimate significance of the Hunnic Empire lies not merely in its military conquests or political achievements, but in its demonstration of the creative potential that emerges when different cultures encounter one another under conditions that promote exchange and adaptation. The Hunnic legacy reminds us that historical progress often results from the collision and synthesis of different traditions, and that the most profound changes in human civilization frequently occur at the margins where established societies encounter dynamic and challenging alternatives. Their brief but brilliant moment of dominance helped to reshape the political, cultural, and demographic landscape of Europe in ways that continue to influence our world today, making their history not merely a fascinating chapter in the past, but an essential key to understanding the forces that have shaped our present. The legacy of the Mongol Empire extends far beyond the traditional boundaries of military conquest and political dominion, weaving itself into the very fabric of human civilization in ways that continue to reverberate through contemporary society. Their influence on global trade networks established precedents for international commerce that would eventually evolve into the complex economic systems we navigate today. The Silk Road, under Mongol protection and administration, became more than just a trade route. It transformed into a conduit for cultural exchange, technological innovation, and intellectual development that fundamentally altered the trajectory of human progress. The Mongol approach to governance, characterized by pragmatic flexibility and cultural tolerance, offered a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchical systems that dominated much of the medieval world. This administrative philosophy, which prioritized effectiveness over ideological purity, created environments where diverse populations could coexist and contribute to the broader imperial project. The meritocratic elements within Mongol society, where individuals could advance based on ability rather than birth, challenged existing social structures and introduced concepts of social mobility that would later influence political thought throughout Europe and Asia. Their revolutionary military tactics and organizational structures fundamentally changed the nature of warfare, introducing concepts of rapid mobility, coordinated communication, and psychological warfare that remain relevant in modern military doctrine. The Mongol decimal system of military organization, with its clear command structures and efficient communication networks, provided a template for military organization that influenced armies across continents. The integration of diverse military technologies and techniques from conquered territories demonstrated an early form of technological synthesis that prefigured later patterns of innovation and adaptation. The Mongol Empire's impact on urban development and architectural innovation created lasting changes in city planning and construction techniques across their vast territories. Cities like Karakorum, Beijing under Yuan dynasty rule, and various Central Asian urban centers showcased architectural fusion that combined Mongol practical needs with local building traditions. These urban experiments in multicultural city planning provided early examples of cosmopolitan urban environments that would later influence the development of major trading cities and cultural centers throughout Eurasia. The empire's approach to religious tolerance and cultural preservation established important precedents for managing diverse populations within large political entities. Rather than imposing a uniform religious or cultural system, the Mongols developed sophisticated methods for maintaining stability while allowing local traditions to flourish. This approach to cultural management influenced later imperial systems and contributed to ongoing discussions about multiculturalism, religious freedom, and cultural preservation within modern nation-states. The Mongol postal system, known as the Yam, represented one of history's most sophisticated communication networks, establishing principles of rapid, long-distance communication that anticipated modern postal services and telecommunications systems. The efficiency and reliability of this system enabled effective governance across vast distances and facilitated the rapid exchange of information that was crucial for both administrative and commercial purposes. The organizational principles underlying the Yam system influenced the development of communication networks throughout Eurasia and provided a model for subsequent empires seeking to manage extensive territories. Environmental and agricultural innovations introduced or promoted by the Mongols had lasting impacts on land use and farming practices across their empire. Their pastoral background provided them with deep understanding of sustainable land management, which they applied to the diverse agricultural systems they encountered. The exchange of crops, farming techniques, and agricultural knowledge facilitated by Mongol trade networks contributed to agricultural diversification and improved food security across multiple regions, effects that continued long after the empire's political dissolution. The Mongol influence on legal systems and administrative practices created lasting changes in governance structures throughout their former territories. The Great Yasa, while never fully codified in surviving documents, represented an early attempt at creating unified legal principles that could be applied across diverse cultural contexts. Elements of Mongol legal thought and administrative practice were absorbed into local legal traditions and continued to influence governance long after Mongol political control had ended. Scientific and technological exchange facilitated by Mongol rule accelerated the development and spread of innovations that would prove crucial for later historical developments. The empire's role in transmitting Chinese inventions like gunpowder, printing, and navigation technologies to Western regions fundamentally altered the trajectory of European development. Similarly, the westward transmission of Islamic mathematical and astronomical knowledge, facilitated by Mongol patronage and protection, contributed to intellectual developments that would eventually fuel the European Renaissance. The the Mongol approach to diplomacy and international relations established precedents for managing relationships between diverse political entities. Their sophisticated understanding of alliance building, tribute systems, and diplomatic protocol influenced the development of international relations throughout Eurasia. The concept of diplomatic immunity, the use of diplomatic marriages to cement alliances, and the development of complex tribute relationships all reflected Mongol innovations in international diplomacy that would influence subsequent diplomatic practices. Cultural and artistic exchange under Mongol rule created lasting impacts on artistic traditions and cultural development across their empire. The synthesis of artistic styles, the patronage of diverse cultural traditions, and the facilitation of artistic exchange between distant regions contributed to the development of new artistic forms and cultural expressions. These cultural innovations continued to influence artistic development long after the empire's political fragmentation, contributing to the rich cultural heritage of regions from Eastern Europe to East Asia. The Mongol Empire's impact on language development and linguistic exchange created lasting changes in the vocabulary, structure, and development of languages across Eurasia. Mongolian loanwords entered numerous languages, while the empire's multilingual administrative needs promoted the development of translation practices and linguistic scholarship. The empire's role in facilitating communication between speakers of different languages contributed to the development of lingua francas and trade languages that remained important for centuries after Mongol rule ended. Educational and intellectual exchange promoted by Mongol rulers contributed to the preservation and transmission of knowledge across cultural boundaries. The empire's libraries, schools, and centers of learning facilitated the exchange of ideas between different intellectual traditions, contributing to the development of new forms of knowledge and understanding. The Mongol patronage of scholars and intellectuals from diverse backgrounds created environments where different intellectual traditions could interact and influence each other, contributing to intellectual developments that extended far beyond the empire's political boundaries. The demographic and population movements facilitated by Mongol conquest and administration created lasting changes in the ethnic and cultural composition of regions across Eurasia. While some of these movements were involuntary, resulting from conquest and deportation, others represented voluntary migration in search of economic opportunities within the expanding empire. These population movements contributed to the development of new ethnic and cultural identities and influenced the demographic patterns that would shape subsequent historical developments. The Mongol Empire's economic innovations, including their approach to taxation, currency, and trade regulation, established precedents for economic management that influenced subsequent economic systems. Their use of paper money, their development of credit systems, and their approach to international trade created economic innovations that would prove influential for later economic development. The empire's role in establishing standardized weights, measures, and currency systems facilitated trade and commerce in ways that continued to influence economic development long after the empire's political dissolution. The empire's impact on medical knowledge and public health practices contributed to the development and spread of medical innovations across their territories. The exchange of medical knowledge between different cultural traditions, facilitated by Mongol rule, contributed to the development of new medical practices and treatments. The empire's approach to managing public health challenges, including their response to epidemic diseases, provided early examples of coordinated public health responses that influenced later approaches to disease management and public health policy. The Mongol influence on transportation and infrastructure development created lasting changes in the physical infrastructure of regions across Eurasia. Their construction and maintenance of roads, bridges, and way stations facilitated not only immediate military and administrative needs, but also long-term economic and cultural development. Many of the transportation routes established or improved under Mongol rule continued to serve as important communication and trade arteries for centuries after the empire's decline, contributing to the ongoing economic and cultural development of these regions. The empire's approach to resource management and environmental policy established precedents for managing natural resources across diverse ecological zones. Their understanding of pastoral ecology, combined with their experience managing agricultural and urban environments, contributed to the development of resource management practices that balanced immediate needs with long-term sustainability. These approaches to environmental management influenced subsequent practices and contributed to ongoing discussions about sustainable resource use and environmental stewardship. The Mongol Empire's legacy in gender relations and family structures created lasting influences on social organization across their former territories. The relatively high status of women in traditional Mongol society, combined with their pragmatic approach to social organization, influenced gender relations and family structures in regions under their control. These influences contributed to variations in gender roles and family organization that persisted long after Mongol political control had ended, contributing to the diverse patterns of social organization found across Eurasia. The empire's impact on maritime technology and navigation contributed to the development of seafaring capabilities that would prove crucial for later historical developments. While primarily known as a land-based empire, the Mongols' attempts at naval expansion, particularly their invasions of Japan and Java, contributed to the development of maritime technologies and navigation techniques. Their integration of Chinese naval technologies with their own military innovations influenced the development of naval capabilities across East and Southeast Asia. The Mongol approach to succession and political transition established precedents for managing leadership changes within large, diverse political entities. While often marked by conflict and instability, the Mongol succession system also demonstrated innovative approaches to maintaining political continuity across vast territories with diverse populations. The lessons learned from Mongol succession practices, both successful and unsuccessful, influenced the development of succession systems in subsequent empires and political entities. The empire's influence on philosophical and religious thought created lasting impacts on intellectual development across their territories. The Mongol encounter with diverse philosophical and religious traditions, combined with their pragmatic approach to belief systems, contributed to the development of syncretic philosophical and religious movements that continued to influence intellectual development long after the empire's decline. The empire's role in facilitating dialogue between different intellectual traditions contributed to the development of new forms of philosophical and religious understanding. The Mongol Empire's impact on cartography and geographical knowledge fundamentally altered human understanding of world geography and contributed to the development of more accurate maps and geographical knowledge. Their extensive travels and conquests provided unprecedented opportunities for geographical exploration and mapping, contributing to the development of more accurate and comprehensive geographical knowledge. The maps and geographical accounts produced during and after the Mongol period influenced European exploration and contributed to the development of more sophisticated geographical understanding. The empire's approach to ethnic and cultural diversity established precedents for managing multicultural societies that continue to influence contemporary discussions about diversity, inclusion, and cultural preservation. The Mongol model of cultural tolerance, combined with effective political integration, provided early examples of successful multicultural governance that offer insights for modern efforts to manage diverse societies. Their approach to balancing cultural preservation with political unity continues to inform contemporary debates about multiculturalism and social integration. The lasting impact of the Mongol Empire on human civilization extends far beyond the traditional metrics of political and military achievement, encompassing fundamental changes in how human societies organize themselves, interact with each other, and understand their place in the world. Their legacy continues to influence contemporary global systems, from international trade and diplomacy to cultural exchange and technological innovation, making their historical significance not merely a matter of past achievement, but an ongoing influence on the trajectory of human civilization.